Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house? Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slaten. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slaten, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slaten was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slaten. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slaten. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slaten family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartselle, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slaten began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slaten, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slaten's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slaten family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slaten. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slaten brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slaten. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claimed they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me. He often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slaten's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slaten brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slaten. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slaten's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slaten. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slaten brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills's guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slaten's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills's DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills's house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slaten's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slaten. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slaten's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slaten's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man, who once seemed like a role model, sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slaten, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slaten family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slaten brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slaten's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slaten, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case. if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed. Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slaten brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slaten. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slaten's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind. The mysterious disappearance of Maya Millette. In January 2021, the city of Chula Vista, California, had not been quiet for days on end. During lunch, office workers shared city news with each other, and by late afternoon they consolidated what they'd heard over a family dinner. "Did you hear that?" they said. "A young woman, a mother of 3, has mysteriously disappeared." And each of them voiced their own versions of what had happened, but none of them wanted to be in her shoes personally. 40-year-old Maya Millette, a Filipino-American woman, disappeared from her own home on January 7, 2021. Outdoor surveillance cameras recorded Maya returning home around 5 p.m. The woman was not seen after that. The relatives of the missing woman, who were knocked down, stunned with grief, handed out leaflets with Maya's photos and hung posters around the city. Their concern was understandable. January 10th was the birthday of my eldest daughter. She would never for anything in the world would not miss this holiday, they said in one voice. As reported by the woman's relatives, the last time she got in touch with them was January 7th at 8:15 p.m. Dozens of volunteers and police officers went in search of Maya Millette. They searched the wooded area, nearby neighborhoods, creeks, and an abandoned golf course, but were unable to find anything. Larry Millette himself, the husband of the missing woman, never took part in the search for his wife. Moreover, after some time, he cut off all contact with her relatives. For a long time, the police assumed that Maya, having quarreled with her husband once again, decided to leave him. However, when she left the house, she could have been caught on the neighbor's CCTV camera, so she either did not leave the house, climbed out the window, or left the house in another way. What could be the reason for such strange behavior of a man? Maya, standing out among the others with her unusual beauty, probably had a lot of admirers, and maybe even more than one affair on the side. It is quite possible, without informing anyone, having lost her former feelings for her husband, she ran away from him, and not alone. Maybe that's why he was angry and didn't take action. Larry claimed, "I thought she was still alive because she voluntarily left our home at least twice in 2020 without saying goodbye to me, or our 3 children. We prayed for her safety and well-being. God gave Pablito and Noema Tabalanza 6 children. Maya was born as the 5th, since it was in May that the girl was born. Her parents gave her the name May. She succeeded everywhere. The purposeful character of the girl helped her in this. Thus, being in elementary school, she was in the top 5 students of her class. After the immigration of the family in March 1995 in the city of Honolulu, located in Hawaii, the girl entered the high school Retford, and there she began to show herself. She actively participated in various school and extracurricular activities, especially emphasizing the drama club and dance lessons. After graduating from high school with honors at the age of 17, Maya got a job at McDonald's, where she met her future husband, Larry Millette. A relationship developed between them. When Maya turned 19 years old, they got married. At the same time, the girl entered the University of Hawaii at Manoa, a land-grant state research university. Life was boiling for the young people. While Maya was studying at the university, her husband Larry was training in the Navy in Virginia. After a while, the couple decided to move to the city of Chula Vista, California. In order not to stop studying, Maya continued her studies at the University of San Diego. After graduating with honors, she took a job with the U.S. Navy as a civilian contract specialist. Where are those strange noises coming from? Maya thought. Am I going crazy already, and are they unreal? The phrases, "I love you," "love me," echoed through the house, slightly audible. Day and night they kept the young woman awake, haunting her in different places in the house. Maya's family didn't stop looking. They immediately hired a private detective. To maximize the attention of those who cared, the family repeatedly appealed to the public to help them in their search for her. On February 5th, 2021, the Chula Vista Police Department and the Millette family held a briefing to encourage as many people as possible to look for her. A short time later, skeletal remains were discovered in Orange County that were believed to be Maya Millett's, but this turned out not to be the case. It was then claimed that the remains belonged to a man. It was later proven that the remains were animal bones after all. On April 6th, 2021, Maya's disappearance was broadcast on Good Morning America. The missing person case gained national interest in April 2021 when Maya's sister appeared on Dr. Phil's talk show to talk about the situation. Maya took all matters particularly seriously. Despite the fact that she came from a large family and loved children very much, she was in no hurry to have them. She didn't want to give birth until she and Larry had a steady, stable, high income. That's the American dream. After all, they had to provide their children with the best future imaginable. To make it happen, they had to work very hard and diligently. The right moment came in 2010. Then Maya and Larry had a daughter, Lara. In the wake of her a year later, another daughter, Milani, was born, and in 2016, the heir son, Lazarus Tristan. Maya was a great mother. She devoted all her free time to her children, giving all of herself. She attended all their school events, traveled with them in her SUV. There are some women whose children become the center of their universe. Wise, indulgent, caring. Maya was one of those women. By the end of 2020, the couple's relationship had become strained. Larry assumed that Maya had a lover. Her husband's jealousy knew no bounds, and if before she put up with these attacks, now she could barely tolerate it. Later, the DA's office would report that Maya had warned of Larry's capacity for anger. Just 2 days before his disappearance, police said, Maya texted a friend to end the marriage. "I told him I'm filing for divorce whether he likes it or not," she claimed. "I'm no longer trying to make peace for the sake of the kids." Larry controlled literally every move his wife made. At a frantic pace, the jealousy was escalating into sheer paranoia. Larry could go to her workplace at any time to make sure that Maya was not alone with another man. Larry was also pissed off by the fact that there were plenty of men on his wife's team. Larry once had the audacity to send an email to Maya's former boss, Derek Sopp, requesting that a male colleague be transferred to another division. He followed her practically around the clock, even got the kids involved in their squabbles. Larry once hid a child's cell phone in his spouse's car to track her movements. It got to the point where Larry was getting violent. He almost strangled Maya once. The couple separated, but not for long. In early 2020, Maya moved in with her brother, but rekindled her relationship with Larry after about 6 weeks. On August 12, 2020, Maya texted her brother, JR, "He never lets me be alone. He checks all my emails, messages, messengers, Facebook posts. He even checks my app on Venmo. And then what happens? He just tightens the reins harder." Although Larry wasn't initially a suspect, police have taken a keen interest in his identity. Investigators contacted Maya's relatives, who said that shortly before the disappearance, the couple had gone camping and spent the entire time they were there fighting. Maya returned from the camping trip and told her family that if anything happened to her, Larry would be involved. According to the case file, Maya's friend told police that Maya made a different statement in December 2020. "I don't think he would hurt me, but I think he would hurt the kids to get back at me." Prosecutors say the mother of 3 did not explain further what she meant at the time. When we fall in love, for better or worse, we see the object of our adoration exclusively in a rosy light. Often we project our character traits and attitude to life onto our partner without noticing the red flags, so-called in psychology behavior, that may indicate the presence of an underlying problem or a potential threat to the well-being of the partner relationship. Abusers, manipulators, narcissists, aggressors. We justify them with deficiencies of upbringing, stress, but we should look deeper. Apparently, the nature is so laid down that families were created mostly in youth, when the whole world is presented in rose-colored glasses, so to speak, for a great, sometimes blind love, so that the human race did not stop. And after a while, having gained the necessary life experience, we see in a partner what was so carefully hidden from us at first glance. We think about re-educating, smoothing out all the sharp edges, to reconcile finally. But no, you can't change a grown man. It remains only not to give an outlet for his negative traits. This is the case with jealousy. If a person has certain traumatic events, paranoia is not far away. Returning to the sounds that Maya heard, one might guess that the woman had developed hallucinations amidst the stress of her family's troubles, but that was not the case. The situation took an unexpected turn. Maya remained sane, which is not the case with Larry. A police detective named Lorenzo Ruiz told the public the story of Larry's internet search, releasing screenshots of queries that included subconscious wife training and subconsciously training your wife to give pleasure. Unable to reach an amicable agreement, Larry began to influence Maya's subconscious mind by installing certain devices around the house that made this sound. Larry's cunning ruse was discovered by Maya. According to Matthew Grinley, an investigator with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, in late 2020, Maya sent messages to Larry demanding that he stop playing such audio messages that negatively affect a person's mental health. This is a kind of influence that programs a person to perform certain actions. Maya heard these sounds every day. Maya's sister-in-law named Genesis Tabalamza later told investigators that Larry himself had independently recorded all these words and even confessed to Genesis about it. Who could have inspired Larry to do such a thing? Maybe the specifics of the job and the training he received during his service gave him the idea? The answer will shock many. The investigation found that between September 2020 and the time of Maya's disappearance, Larry sent more than 1,000 messages to various spellcasters and psychics. He purchased about 70 spell charms from them, spending more than $1,000. During a search of the home, police officers found a book titled Magical Love Spells. Larry was sending messages to similar witches and warlocks one time a day for sure. He asked for a spell to make Maya suffer some kind of physical injury that would make her unable to move around on her own, maybe become disabled, in general, to be completely dependent on her husband. Larry thought that seeing his concern at such a time, and the fact that he had not abandoned her in her hour of need, Maya would appreciate his feelings for her. After all, he is such a good man. Here's what he wrote in his messages. I would like a strong spell to bind my wife Maya Millett to me forever, to make her love me unconditionally as I love her. I hope you are able to cast a spell to cause bodily harm or maim, but not to kill. Looking at everything that was happening, at how Larry was gradually losing his mind, Maya was finally convinced of her intentions. In December 2020, Maya decided to divorce her husband. Every event in life, like actions, has an initial mechanism, a so-called trigger. Police believe that Larry's desperation to lose his beloved continued to grow by the day. On January 7th, the day authorities believe Maya contacted a divorce attorney, he was frantically trying to overturn my spouse's decision to file for divorce. I'm shaking inside, ready to snap, he wrote to one of the spellers. Earlier in the day, Maya called a divorce lawyer. By the way, attorneys also reported that Maya strategized how she would serve Larry with divorce papers because she was concerned about his reaction. She considered going somewhere else, and then suing him, and even made a contingency plan to stay in a friend's vacant apartment. But Maya didn't want to leave her children behind, prosecutors reported. She did not want the children to be with the defendant when he found out she was seeking a divorce. Perhaps Larry's extreme behavior, triggered by jealousy of his spouse, can also be blamed on mental health issues the man had, but had been dormant for a long time. Or maybe he always behaved differently than other people, just Maya and Larry did not put out of the trash. Larry's behavior was becoming more and more like that of a psychopath. Larry has a truly horrible temper, Maya wrote in a text message in June, according to the case file. In his own home, he created a small altar in the center of which he placed a joint photo with his spouse. Larry smeared the photo with his own blood and placed 4 candles around the edges. On January 23rd, police officers obtained a search warrant for the Millett family home. They found 16 firearms in the home that belonged to Larry. It was determined that 2 of the guns were in his possession illegally. 4 of the guns for which Larry had a license were missing. When asked by police officers where the weapons had disappeared to, the man explained that he had loaned them to his friend and uncle. In May 2021, Larry received a restraining order for the weapons, after which he had to surrender them to the authorities. This was justified by the fact that police found pictures of Larry's young son surrounded by guns in the house. It was possible that the children had access to it, so fearing for the possibility of them hurting themselves, the court ordered the order. The day after Maya's disappearance, at approximately 6:45 a.m., a neighbor's surveillance camera captured the Millett family's black SUV, a Lexus GX 460, driven by Larry. The man returned home at approximately 6 p.m. Where he had been all this time is not known. Another suspicious moment. The car was originally parked in such a way that the back of it was not in view of the neighbor's security cameras. As we remember from the beginning of this story, Maya's family was planning a birthday party for her oldest daughter on January 10th, 2021. So when Maya stopped answering calls and texts, one of her siblings traveled to Chula Vista to make sure everything was okay. When Maya's brother met with Larry, the latter told him that his wife had gone to one of her rooms the night before after their argument, locked herself in it, and was not talking to anyone. In the morning, Larry took his son to Solana Beach, a coastal town in San Diego County, and when he returned, Maya was still in the locked bedroom on the 2nd floor. On January 9th, Larry again told Maya's relatives the same story about the locked room, but no one believed him. The relatives demanded that Larry grant them access. When Maya's family entered the room, it was empty. Maya was nowhere to be found in the house. However, her car was parked outside the house. Only her credit card and driver's license were missing. After that, around midnight, Maya's older sister, Chris, filed a missing persons report with the police. It wasn't until January 15th, after his spouse missed his oldest daughter's 11th birthday, that Larry Millett said he was concerned about his wife's fate. In addition, on January 8th, the day after Maya disappeared, Larry did not text any of the psychics. And on January 9th, according to prosecutors, he asked a witch to lift all spells on Maya and cast spells on a man he believed Maya was having an affair with. It is clear that Maya was unlikely to have left her house, otherwise the security camera would have recorded it. On that unfortunate day, another strange thing happened. Larry and Maya's children were playing in the yard at about 10 p.m. This event did not go unnoticed by a neighbor of the Millett family. He was surprised by it, since it was late and cold outside. At 9:57 p.m., the neighbor's surveillance camera captured the sound of 9 loud bangs. Police speculated that they may well have been gunshots. After audio analysis of the video, police were unable to understand the nature of the sounds. Another coincidence that casts doubt on the man. Larry owned a huge gun collection, including a .40 caliber Smith Wesson pistol, which police were unable to locate in the house, according to court documents. Billy Little, a junior attorney working with Maya's family to investigate the case, was able to uncover one incident that occurred 15 years ago, specifically on the evening of April 30th, 1997, in San Diego's Bay Terrace neighborhood. Maya met Larry Millett in high school after he moved to Hawaii from San Diego with his family. The move may have been prompted by Larry's arrest for a 1997 juvenile gang-related assault. I have reason to believe that he, Larry, was in a gang, the attorney argued. As a juvenile, Larry was arrested for a stabbing. The victim of the attack suffered multiple stab wounds and was rushed to Mercy Hospital, where he eventually recovered. As a rule, criminal records often find their echoes in adulthood. In an interview in January 2021, Larry admitted that he did have an argument with Maya in 2020. As of February 3, 2021, Larry stopped cooperating with the police. On July 22nd, Larry was officially named a suspect. Investigators assumed that the 41-year-old man killed his wife on the night of January 7th, ate, and then disposed of her body. In interviews, Larry told the same story that Maya's relatives had heard. about the argument in the room his wife had locked herself in. By a strange coincidence, his phone was turned off for about 11 hours on January 8th. Larry didn't show up for work that same day, and no one reliably knew exactly what he was doing. It was impossible to track his whereabouts. Too bad the neighbor's video surveillance camera is a mute witness to the events that unfolded and can't talk. The camera shows Larry driving his car up to the garage in such a way that the rear of the car is not in the frame. Larry may well have known which part the camera was capturing and positioned the car in a convenient manner. During this time, he could safely carry Maya's body through the garage and then, loading it into the trunk, drive away to dispose of it. Following his arrest, the man remained in custody and was held without bail. On October 19, 2021, Larry Millett was arrested for the murder of his wife Maya based on circumstantial evidence, and the children were given legal custody to his parents. To prevent further emotional trauma, the court barred Larry from having contact with his children. But the man violated that injunction more than once. He called his relatives, who gave him the opportunity to talk on the phone with his children. In total, he made more than 100 phone calls and talked to his children for more than 9 hours. According to prosecutors, during some of the calls, Larry made disparaging comments about Maya's family or asked for news headlines to be read to him. He asked an 11-year-old girl to have her and her 10-year-old sister watch a movie called Shot Caller, an R-rated movie that contains a warning, said Deputy District Attorney Christy Bowles. Essentially, it's a story about a businessman who goes to jail. Larry suggested that children watch it to see what kind of environment he was in. As a result of the court, Larry was stripped of all phone calls except for calling his attorney. However, as early as October 2022, Larry was granted permission to communicate with his children in writing. He was still prohibited from speaking with them through personal visits and the telephone. In order for the children to continue attending their current schools in Chula Vista, they were awarded custody to their paternal grandparents on October 19, 2021. Maya's sister also wanted custody of her nephews, but was denied. Maya's family was allowed to visit the children, but they still wanted to seek full custody of them through the court. The judge ordered Larry Millett's parents to facilitate maternal visitation with the family and work to obtain mental health services for the minors. When visiting the children, relatives are prohibited from discussing any details about ongoing criminal or probate cases with the children. Fairness. The children were left in the care of the parents of their mother's alleged killer, in a town where everything reminds them of the tragedy. Maybe the court should have sided with Maya's sister after all, giving custody to her. In June 2022, Larry's lawyer filed an appeal claiming the man was incompetent to stand trial, but after a psychiatric evaluation, Larry Millett was found competent. It is unlikely that an insane man could have been aware of his actions in cleaning up his tracks. When examining Larry's seized cell phone, it was found that all the text messages he wrote to his wife had been deleted. When asked where the correspondence had gone, Larry explained that he simply wanted to free up space on his phone. That's a strange answer, because the messages don't take up that much space on the device. During the trial, it turned out that Larry had withdrawn a large amount of money from his bank account. Perhaps with the money in hand, Larry was making plans to escape, or maybe he just wanted to move to another city, starting a new life with his children. Charged with murdering his wife and illegal possession of weapons, Larry Millett's trial is scheduled to take place in 2024. However, the trial has already been postponed and moved to other dates more than once. Could it be a matter of so-called circumstantial evidence? After all, circumstantial evidence is evidence that relies on an inference that connects it to a fact. For example, fingerprints at a crime scene. Direct evidence in turn supports the truth of a statement directly, that is, without the need for any additional evidence or inference. It is easy to get confused without the necessary legal skills and experience. In any case, the situation is unfolding before our eyes, picking up its pace. One thing is constant and tragic. The once prosperous, at least in appearance, family is destroyed. The mother has disappeared and is apparently dead. The father is in prison and apparently the perpetrator of the atrocity. The 3 children are left without parental love. 3 innocent souls traumatized for life, left to live in a society that will remind them of what happened many times over, whether in reproach or out of pity, grieving the wound. This story is about a woman whose life is filled with lies from beginning to end. You will learn how the unscrupulous deceiver ends up in pursuit of big money and how many human destinies it can affect. Michelle grew up in the town of Hearst in the suburbs of Dallas, Texas. She had a younger sister, Laura. The girl's mother left home in search of a better life, so the upbringing of children was the father. It was not easy for a man to raise 2 daughters alone. He survived on occasional earnings at a construction site and often relied on alcohol. In search of easy money, he repeatedly thought up and implemented devious plans for profit. He would take a job at one factory or another and deliberately injure himself in order to obtain insurance money compensation. The fraud scheme worked, but not for long. With the help of CCTV cameras at one of the workplaces, the scheme was uncovered, and Michelle and Laura's father was sent into custody. Michelle grew up in a world of lies, deceit, and manipulation from childhood. This was her normal life, from which she wanted to escape by any means possible. But it is impossible to escape from herself, because lies have already become a part of her life, and she simply did not know how to live differently. The girl dreams of growing up faster to get out of the hated poverty. At the age of 15, Michelle looks very spectacular, a petite brunette of athletic build. She attracts a lot of interest from guys both of her own and older age. Even then, Michelle realizes that with the help of her feminine power and charm, she can easily manage to manipulate any men in her environment in order to get what she wants. So in her life begins a series of love relationships with different men. At the age of 17, Michelle drops out of school and marries for the first time to 16-year-old Kenneth O'Brien. She informs the boyfriend that she is expecting a baby. Kenneth, taking full responsibility for his young wife and future child, enlists in the army. The couple moves frequently. 2 more children are born to them in this marriage. One city is replaced by another. Temporary housing of the military was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. Such a life does not suit her, and after 5 years, she leaves, naming the reason for divorce beatings and cheating on the part of her husband. Michelle returns to her native Hearst. In front of relatives and friends, she appears as a victim of domestic violence and receives the necessary support and begins to organize her life anew. After a while, she falls in love with her former classmate Brandon. The young man is head over heels in love with Michelle and gladly accepted her 3 children. The lovers prepare for the wedding. However, on the eve of the wedding, Michelle infuriates Brandon. It turns out that the girl did not divorce her first husband. She was very afraid to talk to him about divorce because of the abuse, so she did not send the documents. With the help of a lawyer, this issue was quickly settled and the couple was able to marry in 1994. At first, family life flowed calmly and measured. Brandon was engaged in the development of his IT company, and Michelle worked as a dental assistant. But quiet family life was not the limit of Michelle's dreams. She has always needed more. She starts bringing home all sorts of dental equipment and supplies. The cash doesn't fit in her purse. Brandon suspected something wrong. Eventually, Michelle was caught stealing. It was only by luck that a trial was avoided. But Brandon's trust issues with his wife were just beginning. Responding to neighbors' reports that cars were frequently arriving at the house while he was at work, Brandon installed a tape recorder in several rooms of the house. Listening to the tape, he heard various men visiting their home throughout the day. Brandon does his own little investigation and learns that the reason for the divorce in Michelle's first marriage was her numerous infidelities, not her husband's beatings, as she told everyone. Brandon's patience broke, and he demanded a divorce. Michelle was furious that Brandon initiated the divorce, and while he was at work, she got back at him. "I had a very nice saltwater aquarium with thousands of dollars worth of fish in it," Brandon says. "She poured Comet into it and killed all the fish." But Michelle didn't stop there. Brandon also had a beloved dog named Domino. Michelle stuffed the dog with sleeping pills, which led to the death of the living creature. Michelle put Domino to sleep. "If you're shocked at this point, we've only scratched the surface," Brandon says. "It was a nightmare that wouldn't stop. You can't make that girl go away." Unfortunately, Brandon learned the truth about Michelle when his own marriage was completely destroyed. Everything Michelle did with Brandon Dixon pales in comparison to her adventures with other men. It was later revealed that John Paul Ray, also a student at the high school Michelle attended in Hearst, was the father of her first child. Instead of revealing this information to John, she told Kenneth O'Brien that the child was his, forcing him to marry her. Kenneth, for 13 years, thought the eldest son was his own. John later told police that Kenneth paid child support from age 5 to 18 and did not know he was not the father. After Brandon and Michelle divorced, she moved in with John, the father of her first child. They lived in a common-law marriage for 8 years. The relationship came to an abrupt end when John began to suspect his wife of cheating. Michelle didn't deny it. She confirmed the affair on the side. John moved out, leaving most of Michelle's possessions. Michelle's next love was Greg Williams. They were both not so young anymore. Both had a history of past marital failures. The man was married twice and had a daughter. After Greg and Katie divorced in 2003, the couple agreed to share custody of their common daughter, Taylor. However, there was no formal agreement on child support, because the former spouses had a good relationship. Rich, successful, and generous Greg was a perfect match for Michelle. In 2007, Greg and Michelle had a common daughter, Michaela. A year later, they got married. Their marriage was like the American dream. Money, children, love, it was all in abundance. Michelle seemed to have made it through the thorns to the stars and got the life she had always dreamed of. Greg Williams held his family in very high esteem. He grew up in a family with fierce principles and achieved everything on his own from an early age. He loved sports and was a martial arts black belt. In addition to his love of exercise, Greg was also a fan of guns. Both he and Michelle had guns that they kept in their home in Keller. Michelle's gun, a silver .40 caliber pistol, was kept in a safe, but Greg kept his gun, a black Liebherr .45 caliber, always loaded in a case under his bedside table. The couple was determined to make their marriage a success. They threw birthday parties for their children from other marriages at their home in Keller. Michelle's adult children would have barbecues and swim parties. Very often the house was full of friends. But despite the picturesque suburban home and a precocious daughter, Greg and Michelle were not the classic American couple. They met through an online community for bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism, and their wild adult house parties led to numerous complaints from neighbors. Without making the matter public, the couple decides to move out. The night before, Michelle and Greg had been unable to sleep for a long time. They were preparing to buy a new house for $4.5 million. They emotionally discussed the upcoming event. Greg stayed in the bedroom alone. Michelle went out to her crying daughter and fell asleep with her in the room. On October 13, 2011, at 4:40 a.m., an emergency call came in. A crying woman screamed into the phone that she and her husband had been attacked by a robber. She was injured, and her husband had been shot. Within minutes, police arrived at the scene of the tragedy. Inside the home, detectives found a television on full volume and a baby sleeping on the couch. Michelle's daughter was sound asleep and unaffected in any way by the attack that occurred. The woman's behavior alerted police officers. She was behaving rather strangely and did not look like she had just experienced a burglary. Soon, the gated community was filled with police cars, detectives, and forensic experts. The lot was cordoned off, and police searched every inch of the nearly 5,000-square-foot home. Michelle was fully dressed, had her hair styled, and was acting very calm. She told police she was asleep, but her clothing and demeanor said otherwise. As the only witness, Michelle was taken to the Keller Township Police Station for questioning. After several hours of talking to police and investigators, Michelle's story began to fall apart like a house of cards. According to the woman, the intruder, dressed in all black, hit her on the head with a wrench. She fell from the blow, but was conscious and heard a gunshot. The stranger then fled through the back door of the house. Michelle Williams's account did not match what police saw at the scene. Greg Williams was shot in the head while lying in bed. A .45 caliber handgun, presumably used by the intruder, was found near the back door next to a wrench. There were no fingerprints on either weapon. Neither was found to show any signs of forced entry. The family's valuables and money were untouched. examined CCTV footage from a neighbor's camera showed that only one car had entered the gated community in the hours before the crime. Police confirmed that the car belonged to a newspaper delivery man. To confuse the investigation, Michelle came up with a version of the attack. She hit herself with a wrench and made their large house look like the scene of the attack. But detectives did their due diligence and noticed a number of details that didn't add up. Michelle Williams was fully dressed, her hair was styled, and she had fresh makeup on her face. It gave the impression as if she was waiting for someone. The gun used during the crime was found in the house without any fingerprints, and the final detail that proved Michelle's lie was the $20,000 in cash that was not stolen in the robbery. Michelle had no explanation for why a successful businessman and devoted father decided to take his own life, but she was able to explain her behavior. Michelle claimed she wanted to spare their young daughter the bitter truth about her father's self-inflicted death. She admitted to police that she wiped down the gun and washed Greg's hands to cover up fingerprints before desperately staging a home invasion and calling emergency services. As bizarre as that explanation was, it became obvious to police why no evidence was found in the house. Michelle admitted to wiping the crime scene with bleach and hitting herself in the face with a wrench to present a more realistic picture of the attack. From the beginning, Keller police doubted the credibility of Michelle's testimony. But at the time, no physical evidence was presented linking her to the crime. Michelle was arrested for perjury, but was soon released home. Around 5 p.m. on the evening of her husband's murder, Michelle went to her sister Laura's home and did not mention the late Greg's name once during the evening. Michelle cried from time to time, but it didn't seem sincere, her sister Laura Cusick said when questioned by police. The morning after the tragedy, Michelle woke up in a great mood. She was beautifully dressed, with her hair styled and makeup on. In high spirits, the recent widow went for breakfast at a famous restaurant that served the best pancakes with syrup. While the police were looking into the theory that Greg had taken his own life, struggling to find a motive and obtain credible evidence of it, Michelle herself presented the investigation with first a motive and then evidence of her guilt. Going through the documents from the first interrogation, the investigators were attracted by Michelle's words that she didn't care about a single penny. But her actions proved otherwise. After Greg's death, Michelle quickly begins liquidating assets from family companies and spending large sums of money. She cashes checks through Greg's IT company. The amount of checks cashed is not disclosed anywhere. In all likelihood, we are talking about a lot of money. After receiving cash from the sale of the Blueberries frozen yogurt store in Keller, Michelle made one of her biggest blunders. She went to the insurance company, hoping to get a payout on Greg's life insurance policy. Michelle was the sole beneficiary on Greg's life insurance policy, which was taken out on August 12, 2011, almost exactly 2 months before he was killed. But one important fact the woman missed. According to the terms of the insurance policy, Greg's death was not an insured event because he left his life voluntarily, and at the last moment, she was denied the money. The desire to get the insured sum of $600,000 was the main motive for the crime. Later, another important fact of financial fraud comes to light that casts suspicion on the widow. Fictitious financial documents for a mortgage loan were used to purchase the house that Greg and Michelle had been preparing for on the eve of his death. The account numbers were intentionally changed, and the lender did not immediately notice the elaborate fraud. When Greg died, Michelle canceled a meeting with the mortgage company, and the fake account was not discussed until it caught the attention of the police. Michelle, confident of her impunity, writes a check for $18,000 to attorney Kenneth Wincorn, and takes a week-long vacation to Grapevine with her children. During the 3-month investigation into Greg Williams' death, police were able to unravel his wife's web of deceit. An autopsy was performed on Greg, which proves that the man was shot from a range of 12 to 18 inches. Moreover, the toxicology examination conducted provided a report proving that Greg had a large dose of sleeping pills in his system at the time of his death. Also, the police determined that there was no assault on the house. Mrs. Williams sedated her husband and shot him from a foot away after turning up the volume on the television. Daughter Michelle, who was asleep in her room, did not hear anything. On November 3, 2011, based on the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's report, Greg Williams's death was officially ruled a homicide. Michelle Williams was arrested on January 9th as she was on her way to a fitness center. She was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and making a false statement to police. Michelle was both the only witness to the crime and the only suspect. Bail was set at $522,000 to be released from custody pending a court hearing. But Michelle spent a week in custody and was released on $85,000. Dressed in gym clothes, Michelle walked out of jail with a GPS monitor and under the arm of attorney Kenneth Wincorn, who was now officially representing her. Greg's first wife, Kathy, was furious when she found out that attorney Wincorn was defending Michelle. That money she paid him was part of Greg's estate, and it should never have gone to pay the legal bills of the woman who was accused of killing him. Online court records list Kenneth Wincorn as the attorney for Katie and Greg's divorce in 2003, and Wincorn's name and signature appear on legal documents regarding the custody agreement for their shared daughter Taylor in 2008. However, Kenneth Wincorn's defense of collusion with Michelle Williams will be exonerated by providing evidence. The divorce was handled by his company, and he personally never represented Greg. Kenneth Wincorn said he first learned of Greg's murder from an IT company employee. It was very shocking, Wincorn says, adding that Michelle later sought his help. After her plot to cash in on Greg's death is foiled, Michelle Williams changes her name to Shelley and appears as a fitness guru hoping to start a new life. On Facebook, Shelley publicly announced her relationship with Gene Wallace, a friend of her oldest son, a man nearly 15 years younger than her. Shelley and Gene opened a fitness club in Bedford and heavily promoted it online. Armed with an ankle bracelet with a GPS tracker, Michelle spent the next few months enjoying her new boyfriend, fitness classes, and court hearings. She often appeared in court dressed for a night out on the town, wearing miniskirts, knee-length boots, and deep-cut blouses. She never mourned Greg's death for a second, says Greg's ex-wife, Kathy. Rob Conover was friends with Greg Williams for more than 20 years and attended many of Michelle's hearings. He recalls how she deftly manipulated police officers at the courthouse, making them see her as an innocent woman in need of protection. On October 9, 2013, 45-year-old Michelle Williams took a plea deal with the county and pleaded guilty to tampering with evidence and deadly conduct. She will receive 18 years in prison for tampering with evidence and for deadly dangerous conduct, a third-degree felony that only exists in a few states. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. Things can go differently. Play big, win big, or lose big, Michelle said in an interview. With the plea bargain, I expect to do a couple years, and after that, I'll be out on parole. But in February 2014, Michelle Williams, in an interview, suddenly changes her testimony and says she is not guilty of the crime. The judge immediately rescinds the plea bargain and sets a date for the first trial. Opening arguments have begun in the trial of a Texas woman, dubbed by the media as Keller's Black Widow, who was accused of intentionally targeting her husband in 2011 for an insurance payoff. Michelle Williams, 45, was charged with the crime. In court, prosecutors described the crime as a clearly planned scheme of acts to profit from Greg's substantial life insurance policy. In their opening statement, prosecutors told jurors that Mrs. Williams shot her husband in the head after drugging him with sleeping pills beforehand in order to collect on his life insurance policy. The motive was money, time-tested money, greed, Assistant District Attorney Jack Strickland said in court. Although Michelle admitted that she cleaned the gun and Greg's body, the absence of her DNA at the scene raised doubts about whether the first-degree murder charge would stick. In response to an interview request, Michelle's attorney released a statement on her behalf. Attorney Kenneth Wincorn described the difficulties in the case caused by the spotlessly clean crime scene. The prosecution struggled to prove a premeditated crime, disregarding the fact that there was no DNA from the suspect. In repeated searches, cleaning products were found, but it stands to reason that Michelle's fingerprints were on them, since the products were in the house where she lived and did the cleaning. If the jury concludes that Michelle tampered with evidence of Greg's death, making it look like the man had spontaneously passed away,
and then cleaned up the crime scene by hiding evidence and then lying about it, she will get a life sentence. But if Michelle is sentenced as scheduled on April 21st, no jury will ever get a chance to hear the whole story and decide on the appropriate punishment. Through careful questioning of the Williams couple's friends and acquaintances, information regularly emerged about the unfavorable environment that had prevailed in their family for a long period of time. According to the studied correspondence in social networks and messengers, it was found that the couple quarreled very often, and the reason was finances. At the trial, prosecutors said that in the hours leading up to the violent death, Greg Williams argued with his wife over their finances and even slapped her for spending a large amount of money that had been set aside as a down payment on a house. But Michelle Williams' defense argued that Greg Williams had taken his own life and that the successful business owner needed his wife alive, not dead. According to defense attorney Clay Graham, Greg Williams often suffered from depression and regularly used sedatives and steroids. On the eve of the crime, he was allegedly severely depressed due to the loss of his grandmother and best friend, who ironically had taken his own life. Defense counsel told the court that when Michelle Williams found her husband dead with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, she panicked and in a fit of fear began to cover up the tragedy without realizing it. She had one goal: to protect her 4-year-old daughter from psychological trauma by hiding the truth from her. Michelle Williams never once changed herself, presenting at court hearings in different images, with styled hair and manicure. At one hearing, the defendant, dressed in an off-white blouse and black vest, showed little emotion throughout most of the trial, but did not forget to wipe away tears during a presentation of photographs showing images of the body of murdered Greg Williams. The court also heard testimony from Michelle Williams' adult son, Andrew O'Brien, who said his mother, Michelle Williams, asked him to help frame Greg Williams' ex-wife, Kathy. She planned to blame her for Greg's death using the motive of unreconciled differences over the custody of their daughter, Taylor. But that plan was a failure from the get-go. After all, there was never any disagreement between the former spouses about the custody of their daughter, and it would have been very difficult to prove otherwise. Asked about his reaction to his mother's unusual request, 26-year-old Andrew O'Brien said he was very shocked by such a proposal and thought she was having a mental breakdown. Michelle confronted her sons at the trial when they testified against her. The jury later found Michelle guilty of felony tampering with physical evidence. According to the show, she provided false information that she was pregnant with twins, hoping to delay her sentencing. But this version was not confirmed and the verdict was announced. Michelle's acting abilities and her natural charm, which she tried her best to demonstrate during each hearing, did not spare her from a harsh sentence. Sandwiched between a scenario in which she was a cold-blooded criminal and one in which she was portrayed as a deranged wife and mother acting on impulse, Michelle chose the latter. "He did it," she said, wrapping her arms around her head. Michelle even congratulated the detective on solving the case. "I wouldn't have gotten through the day," she said. "You've won." Even before the police admitted to doubting Michelle's story, few believed Greg had lost his life. He had too much to live for, and he knew all too well how much pain an untimely death causes. Kathy Williams believes that Michelle's relationship with Gene Wallace began when Greg was still alive and may be the elusive motive for this crime. If Greg had found out she was sleeping with her little boyfriend, he would have dumped her, and she would have gotten nothing. Katie says, "Greg was willing to put up with a lot, but he wasn't willing to put up with cheating." "She's ruined so many lives you can't even imagine," Brandon says. "She's a professional manipulator. If the courts had gone further and interviewed all of us, things could have gone in a different direction." Michelle was sentenced to 60 years in prison. The judge also ruled that she would have to serve a minimum of 30 years before being eligible for parole. Michelle currently remains incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, Texas. Michelle Williams is a felon and fraudster who is currently serving time in prison for all of her willful acts. She has never shown remorse for her actions and still refuses to take full responsibility for her crime.
In psychology, there is a special term called Adelie syndrome, which refers to the morbid obsession of one person with another. The affliction received its name in honor of the youngest daughter of the famous French writer, Adelie Hugo. She was a very attractive girl and a talented pianist, but unrequited love noticeably affected her mental state. As a result, the beauty simply poisoned the life of herself and her lover, who for years pursued, pretending to be his wife, then ruined his career and personal life. Unfortunately, 43 years of her 84 years, Adele spent in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. It is worth noting that the condition in which one person is overly interested in, or even obsessed with, another so much that he loses the ability to control his emotions, a fairly common phenomenon. In most cases, an experienced psychologist can help. Sometimes hospitalization and more thorough therapy are required, but sometimes such obsession borders on insanity, pushing a person to desperate, unpredictable, and extremely cruel actions. The case of Emma Ljungstig in 2008 shook the whole of Europe and became one of the most brutal in the history of Swedish forensic science. The perpetrator could be recognized as insane, and because of the lack of hard evidence, the case and even wanted to close, but he showed his true face in the courtroom. An immature young family. Emma Ljungstig was a native of Stockholm, where she was born on February 16, 1985, where almost all of her childhood and adolescence passed. She was brought up in a simple family where she was the younger of 2 daughters and grew up with her older sister, Katharina. At the age of 19, the girl married a young man named Nicholas, with whom she began dating while still in high school. The chosen one was not much older than the girl, and at the time of marriage the bride was already expecting a child. In 20 years, Emma first became a mother, giving birth to a son who was named Max, and a year and a half later she gave birth to a second child, a daughter, Saga. But, despite the appearance of 2 common heirs, the couple were still too young and were not ready for family life and the hardships of everyday life. They constantly quarreled over trifles, could not find a common language, and soon after the birth of their daughter, decided that they should separate. But then, the question of custody of children, which was solved very hard and painful. Nicholas sought not only to help the children financially, but also to take a direct part in their lives and upbringing. Emma was not against it, but soon she had a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Arboga, located about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to her new lover, and took the children with her. The ex-husband was against it, because he wanted to be able to see his daughter and son every day. Ex-spouses repeatedly met in court to settle the matter, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, which she immediately reported to the police. Problems could not be solved peacefully in any way, and each of the parents began to seek sole custody. New love. Emma met a guy named Torgny Hellberg through the internet. They quickly found a common language, got close, and a romantic relationship began between them. The young man was not confused by the fact that the 23-year-old girl already has 2 heirs from a previous marriage, because he had long dreamed of a family and was ready to accept them as his own children. The newly married couple first lived in a small house, which was inherited by Torgny by inheritance. But when the lovers decided to get married, they moved to a larger house, where they could live comfortably, and each of the children would have their own cozy room. The man at that time had a good job with a decent salary, and Emma was engaged in raising small children as well as creating a home, but, being a designer by education, was going to work in the future in the specialty. The couple planned to play a wedding in the summer of 2008, but these plans were not destined to fulfill. Brutal massacre. March 17, 2008 was an ordinary Monday. Torgny went to work early in the morning and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. In the evening, the girl was preparing dinner, waiting for her fiancé to return. And at the same time, she was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, discussing a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At about 6:30 in the evening, Emma received a call from Torgny, warning her that he was late for work. He said they could start dinner without him. After the brief phone conversation, Emma continued with her household chores, fed the children, and then sat down at the computer again, continuing to text with her sister. At 07:07 p.m., their communication was abruptly interrupted, literally half a word. Katarina thought it was very strange, because she saw that her sister was typing a message to her, but for some reason never sent it. 5 minutes later, a worried Katerina called Emma, but she didn't pick up. Then she dialed Torgny's number to find out what had happened. The young man was on his way home from work and was just approaching the house, so he assured Katerina that everything was fine, that Emma was probably distracted by the kids, and that she would call her back as soon as she could. When the man arrived at the threshold, he was surprised to find that the front door was unlocked. When he went inside, he immediately noticed the mess, thinking that the children had made a mess while playing. But then he saw brown stains and stains on the floor, realizing with horror that it was blood. Helberg called Emma and the children's names loudly several times, but no one responded. In the hallway on the floor, the man saw a strange object, thinking at first that it was a doll, because the figure was lying in a completely unnatural pose. As he got closer, however, he realized that it was Saga in a pool of her own blood. Her head and face were disfigured beyond recognition and turned into a bloody mess. A little farther away lay her brother in a similarly horrifying state, with a fractured skull. Their mother was also lying on the floor, covered in blood and in an unnatural posture. Her face was badly shattered and disfigured. It seemed that all of them were no longer showing signs of life. Shocked, Tony pulled out his cell phone with trembling hands and dialed the emergency number, reporting what had happened. At that moment, Emma shuddered and let out a loud, long groan. Police officers and paramedics immediately arrived on the scene and found a weak pulse in all 3 victims and quickly began resuscitation. The picture was horrifying. No one understood what kind of beast could do this to a young woman and her children. But saving their lives was the priority. So, first of all efforts were thrown at getting the victims of the attack to the nearest hospital for assistance. Fighting for lives and the beginning of the investigation. From the outset, the arriving paramedics expressed doubts about whether the victims could be brought to the hospital alive at all. However, all 3 were still alive when they arrived at the medical facility. All were diagnosed with open head injuries, with severe brain damage and extensive blood loss. No prognosis was given by the doctors, but only did the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they had managed to save their lives, it was unlikely that they would have ever been able to even breathe on their own. The condition of their mother was assessed as very serious, but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and hooked up to life support machines, hoping her body could cope. While doctors were fighting for the lives of the victims, forensic experts were working at the scene, trying to find clues and reconstruct the picture of the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Scattered belongings, blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics left behind a lot of clutter, as well as moving certain items around to allow access to the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga were lying was literally trampled on, and now the medics had to figure out what footprints belonged to them and if the perpetrator's prints were there. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the 3 victims at most in 13 minutes. Since the last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 07:07 p.m. and at 07:20 p.m. already received a call to the police from a frightened Torgny. That said, the brutality with which the perpetrator massacred them spoke of some personal motive and a deep dislike for the victims. The weapon of the crime was a blunt and heavy object, presumably a hammer, which the mysterious criminal used to bludgeon his victims with ferocity. However, nothing of the kind could not be found at the scene, from which the natural conclusion was that the perpetrator took it with him. First suspect. From the start, Helberg was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emma and was not the father of her children, and therefore it was suggested that perhaps a domestic quarrel between the couple could turn into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned, but he had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was really late at work, which was confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre of his loved ones, he was walking down the street and was caught on a number of CCTV cameras,
Nevertheless, Torney was decided to take a detailed statement, as he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation of the crime. However, he could not remember anything specific, for it was business as usual until he saw the mess and the bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that alerted him was the unlocked front door, which could indicate that Emma had let the criminal in. After questioning, the man was released. By then, he had already informed his fiancée's family, and Emma's parents immediately rushed to Arboga from Stockholm. Together, they went by car straight to the hospital to the victims, but on the way there, they learned from the news on the radio terrible news. Max and Saga died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. Ex-husband's revenge? The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for more than a year and parted peacefully. They did not manage. They constantly quarreled, sued for custody of the children, and the man even threatened the ex-spouse, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything fits. After the breakup of the young woman took the children and took them to another city to his new chosen one, and their father, not having achieved custody through the court on the grounds of hostility to Emma, decided to take a desperate step and in a fit of rage and crucified the heirs. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody, but the man seemed crushed by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if there was some mistake. When he was charged with what had happened, he was at first stunned and then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was away in another city, where he went on business for a day. It sounded strange, but soon his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene when someone was massacring his ex-wife and children. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators remained active at the scene, trying to find any clues, evidence, or traces of the attacker. But the perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. With traces of shoes, everything was much more difficult because the house was visited by a dozen doctors who rendered assistance and took out the victims. Now it was necessary to collect all the footprints there and to find out which of them did not belong to the medics, Torgny or the victims themselves. The law enforcers were afraid that the criminal, having learned that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital and finish what he had started. After all, she was a crucial witness, and in case she came to her senses and could testify, she would certainly give him away. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside Youngstig's room. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that at around 05 in the evening, a stranger in black clothes was walking around Emma and Torney's house. She thought it was strange, but she could not see the man's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested that it could be a girl because the figure was short and fragile. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood on his head also got into the lens of the street surveillance camera, located on the store a couple of minutes' walk from the scene of the crime. It also appeared to law enforcement that the woman in the video was a short, frail-looking girl. But who was she, and why would she wish harm on Emma and her children? The recording decided to show Torgny and to find out his opinion about who the stranger could be and whether he has any assumptions about it. Already from the first frames, the man began to change in his face, turned pale, and then said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schurer, although he could not say for sure. Who is Christina Schurer? Torgny's former sweetheart was born in Hanover, Germany in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with his daughter, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. The girl grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. The girl received a good education in the field of history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, taking part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece
to the island of Crete, where she got a job in one of the popular hotels as a tour guide. There in July came on vacation 26-year-old Torgny, who immediately attracted Christina. He also liked this smart, interesting, and educated girl with whom he had an affair from the first days of acquaintance. Scherer at that time was 29 years old, but a small age difference did not embarrass the couple. Their connection lasted for a week while the guy was vacationing in the hotel, and after his departure they continued to communicate by phone and correspond on the internet. A few months later, Christina came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay at his house. Even then, such behavior seemed to Torgny too intrusive and even tactless. So when Christina offered him a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped that this was the last time they would meet. But the girl continued to call, write, and insist on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Torgny told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again, but Christina pretended not to hear it. She continued to call, asking to come to visit him, and calling Torgny to go on vacation with her. In the spring of 2007, Christina again came to Sweden and began to literally stalk the former boyfriend. She persuaded him to resume their relationship, although he honestly admitted that he is already dating another. Then Christina said that during the previous visit, forgot in his house something of the things, and she needs to take them away. Torgny agreed, but as soon as they crossed the threshold, the former lover tried to seduce him, and having received a firm refusal, said that he will still regret. 3 months later, Christina returned again and began to apologize for her behavior, again persuading the guy to get together, but he rejected her, and in the evening she called, saying that she swallowed pills because she does not want to live without him. Hellberg called her an ambulance and also called her family, telling them about Christina's antics and advising them to see a psychiatrist. After Scherer received the necessary care at the hospital, her mother took her away and placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she spent more than a month. However, the treatment did not give much results, and the girl remained literally obsessed with her former lover, constantly thinking about how to get him back and inventing new reasons for meetings. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, where she rented an apartment with another girl. She started to pursue her ex-boyfriend again, and when she got to meet him, she told him that she had given birth to a son by him, but gave the child to a foster family. Torgny was shocked by this news, but what he was most interested in was when it had happened. The last time they had been intimate was more than a year ago, and after that, they had met 3 more times at different times, but Christine had shown no signs of pregnancy. She herself answered evasively, and each time added some new details. In January 2008, after a dozen unsuccessful attempts to meet with Torgny, Christina wrote him a message in which she told him that their son had been diagnosed with a certain hereditary disease, and now they should go to Germany together to see him. She also added that the child's adoptive father would contact him and give him the details. At this time, she and Emma were in the process of moving to a new home, and the girlfriend was aware of the whole story. She believed that Tony's ex-girlfriend was simply trying to lure him to Germany, and no son had ever existed. When Tony received a call from a man who introduced himself as the adoptive father of her and Christine's child, Tony, on Emma's advice, began to ask questions about when the boy was born, in which hospital it happened, and so on. The interlocutor was clearly annoyed, avoided answering in every possible way, and then, and after all, hung up the phone. So Hellberg finally came to the conclusion that no son never existed. Christine made up the whole story and asked someone from the acquaintances to play along. Christina's arrest and the search for evidence. After learning such a convoluted story, detectives quickly found out where the new suspect lived and went to the address. The door was opened by her roommate, who told them that Christina had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said that she was going back to Germany. A check showed that the girl had indeed left the country, so now the Swedish police had to seek help from their German colleagues to arrest her. On March 20th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. When the suspect was arrested, she claimed that there had been a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the massacre. But after she was taken to Sweden on March 29th, she immediately requested a meeting with Torney, which was denied. She was completely calm, but periodically asked to meet or call her ex again. Christina's rented apartment was thoroughly searched, and her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. All her clothes were thoroughly checked, but no traces of blood were found there. By then, investigators had worked out which of the bloody shoe prints at the scene did not belong to the medics and family members, so it was determined to be athletic. And from the tread pattern, they even figured out the brand and appearance. The size matched the one worn by the suspect, but she herself claimed that she never had such a model of sneakers. However, this statement was quickly refuted, as the shoes were identified by her roommate. Much more interesting findings awaited detectives in Christina's laptop. It was full of photos of Torgny, both their joint, and those where the man was depicted alone or in the company of his new lover. Also, in a separate folder with a very unpleasant signature, contained pictures of Emma and her children, which the suspect copied from the rival's page in the social network. Scherer captioned each photo with insulting, threatening, and downright scary captions. In the recovered search history were found requests on how to commit a murder without leaving traces, how to hide traces of the crime, and how to divert suspicion from himself. Also in the notes, investigators found a plan of Emma and Torney's new home and notes that indicated when the man left for work and what time he returned, and some other notes regarding the family's daily routine. Interview with survivor. Emma's condition was stabilized, her vitals gradually began to improve, and towards the end of March, doctors decided to gradually bring her out of the medically induced coma. Upon awakening, she was still unable to speak because of the breathing tube, but her gaze was meaningful. It was clear that she recognized the relatives present in the room, but did not understand what had happened to her and how she had ended up in the hospital. As soon as the victim became a little stronger and was able to speak clearly, the police agreed to talk to her, but decided not to tell her what had happened to the children. And then it turned out that Emma had no memory of the events of that fateful day, and believed that she must have been in a car accident. She kept asking about the children and whether they were all right. At first, she was given evasive answers, but then her family and medical team decided that there was no point in withholding such information. When Emma was told about what had happened and that her babies were no longer alive, she became hysterical. The doctors had to sedate her, after which she fell asleep, and when she woke up, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This continued for several weeks, and during this time, the mother was told several times about the death of her daughter and son, but her brain apparently refused to accept this information, each time erasing it. After another month, Emma, accompanied by medics, decided to be brought to the scene. Once inside the house, she suddenly remembered everything. The young woman told how she was texting with her sister, setting the table, and the children were playing near her when there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and saw a dark, short female figure on the threshold, but when she asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and her eyes went black. The figure skulked into the house, and the desperate mother, out of her last strength, tried to catch up with her to protect her children, but apparently fell in the hallway, where they tried to finish her off. The trial and the verdict. Christina continued to stubbornly deny her guilt. The weapon of the crime was never found, and almost all the evidence found was circumstantial, which gave her a high chance of getting away with it. However, Christina's roommate, when questioned, said that in March a hammer was missing from her toolkit. She produced the toolkit itself, and the investigation determined that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the murder weapon. But that evidence was also circumstantial. Detectives were able to find surveillance footage from a suburban bus station, where Scherer had traveled 3 times in the week before the crime. She herself could not explain why she visited Arbuga so often, but apparently, the girl came to keep an eye on her future victims. The suspect was also unable to explain why she was searching the internet for information on how to cover up the crime and why she was collecting photos of Emma and her children. On July 29, 2008, the trial over Christina, who was accused of double murder with particular cruelty as well as attempted murder, began. The defendant herself behaved more than strangely. Upon entering the courtroom, she smiled and began to wave her hand, greeting those present. When she was asked questions about the massacre and was shown gruesome footage of the crime scene with mutilated bodies, she suddenly laughed. This suggested that the defendant was insane, but the appointed psychiatric examination established that the girl was sane and perfectly aware of what was happening. Consequently, she enjoyed what she had done and did not even try to hide it. When Emma was in the courtroom and saw Christina there, she fainted. When she was brought to her senses, she said that she finally remembered everything, and this face was the last thing she saw on that fateful day. Despite the defense lawyer's attempts to prove her client's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with no right to ever be released. She was also ordered to pay 20,000 euros in compensation to Emma. No evidence was found that Christina had ever been pregnant and had given birth to a son by Torgny. As for young Stig, her recovery process was long and arduous, but Torgny did not abandon his beloved. They were married in the summer of 2010. The couple are now raising two common heirs who know the sad story of their older brother and sister.
The case of Nancy Paola Reyes Gorses. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits, but sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorses has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorses had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala, little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paola Reyes Gorses. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorses, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorseys worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gorseys was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Gorseys was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Garces ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Garces family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Garces, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, So once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorseys, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman.
He called her name menacingly, and she stopped to examine the unfamiliar silhouette in the darkness. The stranger quickly approached her and grabbed her. She squealed loudly, but a sharp pain knocked her off her feet and the girl fell. The disappearance of people is not an uncommon phenomenon. We live in a disturbing world in which all sorts of things happen to people. Sometimes they disappear through their own fault or through the fault of an intruder. There are many mysterious and unsolved cases of missing citizens all over the world. Analyzing missing persons reports and reviewing police reports shows that the number of disappearance cases has multiplied in 2 decades. Today, let's talk about a case that is still considered one of the worst injustices in the history of the Spanish judicial system. Because decades later, Spain cannot forget the story that took place on the Costa del Sol. This story has everything: love, disappearance, blood, and cruel injustice, which will definitely be corrected, but at a very high cost, which for many years will be remembered not only by Spaniards, but also by the whole world. Hilaria Alicia Hornos was born December 2, 1952 in the rural province of Jaén in the municipality of Arroyo de los Llancos, Spain. At the age of 24, Alicia fell in love and married a Dutch citizen, Willem Waninkoff. Soon the family had their firstborn son Guillermo, then a daughter Rosa, then another daughter Rocio. With the appearance of children, the relationship between the spouses became quite tense. Willem became addicted to drinking, and because of the long absences and lost his job. At the peak of loud arguments, Willem raised his voice at Alicia and could even hit. In order to provide for her family, Alicia had to take a job as a maid in a hotel in Ibiza. It was during this difficult period of her life that Alicia met Dolores Vasquez, who was the director of the hotel where she worked. Maria Dolores Vasquez was the daughter of immigrants from Galicia, Spain, who had settled in the UK. She had a good education and was well-mannered and an interesting conversationalist. A strong friendship developed between the two women, which later developed into a love relationship. A year after the beginning of the relationship with Dolores, Alicia dared to leave her husband and officially formalize the divorce. Willem returned to the Netherlands, and Alicia moved in with Dolores. Soon the women in love bought a new house in Malaga. After the divorce, Alicia received full custody of the 3 children and raised them with Dolores. After her parents divorced in 1983, Rocio and her sister Rosa looked up to Dolores as a second mother and proudly signed Vasquez Hornos. All 3 of Alicia's children adored Dolores. The 5 of them lived in complete love and understanding as a true family. In 1988, the women decided to break off their love relationship, but continued to live together as good friends until 1994. After 11 years together, they finally broke up and Alicia started dating another man, Juan Charillo. Alicia moved into a new home and fully immersed herself in a new romantic relationship. Life for her was filled with new colors and love. Because the children grew up, the beloved man was always near. But at one point, the fairy tale turned into a nightmare. On the morning of October 10th, 1999, Alicia did not find her daughter Rocio at home. At first, Alicia wasn't worried, believing her daughter might have spent the night at her boyfriend's or one of her friends' houses. But when she didn't return home later, Alicia became concerned. The family contacted Rocio's friends and boyfriend, hoping to get reassuring information about their daughter's whereabouts, but no one had seen her. On September 9th, Rocio left home around 5:30 p.m. after saying goodbye to her mother and older sister, Rosa. On that day, she was going with her boyfriend Antonio and her friends to go to a fair in Fuengirola. The girl's house was in the neighborhood of La Cortiera, very close to Antonio's house. Rocio stayed at his house until 10:30 in the evening and decided to return home for a short while to shower and change clothes before meeting her boyfriend and friends at the fair. She never made it home. Even though Alicia was already worried, she decided to take a walk with Juan to calm down rather than immediately report her daughter's disappearance to the police. As they were walking down the street, the woman saw a large blood stain on the road, as if some animal had been killed. She told Juan about it. At first, they didn't pay much attention to it, but when they got closer, Alicia saw sneakers with drops of blood. They were her daughter's sneakers. From Alicia Hornos's recollection, I got closer and saw my daughter's sneakers. I said, "Those are Rocio's sneakers," and he said, "No way." I said, "No, those are my daughter's sneakers." I was hysterical. I said, "Call the police, those are her sneakers." During that walk, in addition to the sneakers, a napkin and several blood stains were found in a vacant lot next to the road Rocio usually walked on. Alicia called the police. Immediately, a missing girl report was filed with a full description. Long hair, brown eyes, wearing a white Nike t-shirt and purple pants. After the officially announced search activities, the forensic investigator reported the need to conduct a forensic examination at the alleged crime scene to find out whose blood was on the road and sneakers. After examining the scene, the first assumptions were the version of an assault or a fight in which someone was injured. But the further investigators followed the trail, the more they found blood stains, and even long chains of stains that looked like drag marks. That means someone was moving very fast, maybe even running. Then the blood traces disappeared, and then the search team noticed a very large stain indicating significant blood loss. They found more and more bloody footprints similar to the drag marks of a bloody body. These tracks led to car tire prints, after which the blood traces disappeared. A cigarette butt, the brand of which was not common in Spain, was found next to the tread marks. Forensics collected all the samples that could help in any way during the investigation.
and DNA from the samples was supposed to help find whoever was at the scene. Based on this data, a thorough investigation was conducted. Along with the investigation and the identification of the blood taken from the traces found, the search for the girl continued. But the investigators were almost certain that Rocio Waninkoff had been murdered. After all, the blood trail started from the sidewalk and continued to a pool of blood large enough to cause her death from volumetric blood loss. Next to the pool were drag marks, and intersecting them and the blood were tire tracks left by a small car with a tire model that was discontinued in 1993. Because the drag marks continued across a heavily sloped area that would have made it difficult for one person to drag the body alone, it was believed that the body was dragged by at least 2 people and then left in a less open area of the vacant lot before a vehicle pulled up to transport the body. But the search did not stop. Volunteers scoured the area on foot, on motorcycles, up hills. Everyone wanted to find Rocio, but at the same time, they were afraid to find her dead. It was very hard for everyone. There were flyers with Rocio's picture everywhere. All the news channels reported about her disappearance. The family actively cooperated with journalists, because as long as Rocio was being talked about, she would not be forgotten. Journalists from all TV channels were on duty at Rocio Waninkoff's house. Everyone wanted the girl to come home, to find her. Time passed, but the search did not yield any results. A few days after Rocio's disappearance, a local cab driver showed up at the police station and said that on the night of the incident, around 10 p.m., he dodged an SUV that was speeding in the oncoming lane of traffic in the area where the girl's sneakers were found on the curb. He added that he heard a piercing scream as he passed the vehicle. There was no doubt, Rocio had been kidnapped and killed by an unknown assailant. This was confirmed by DNA analysis. The blood on the road belonged to Rocio Waninkoff. The family was at a loss for words. These feelings were spreading fast. They were felt not only by the girl's family and friends, but by the whole of Spain. On November 2nd, 1999, 25 days after Rocio's disappearance, a disfigured body, possibly Rocio's, was found near the Los Altos del Rodeo Sports Club, between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcantara. The body was partially covered with bushes and fallen leaves, and was hidden behind a hedge separating a housing development that was quite close to the highway. It was a narrow path that could hardly be traveled by car. The girl was searched for within the confines of her home, and she was found in another town. When the police arrived at the place, they found the body very badly decomposed. During the evidence collection, large black garbage bags were found containing the girl's clothes. One of the bags had the number 8 painted on it, indicating that the bags had not been purchased specifically for the transportation of the body, but had only been reused. Upon discovering the clothes, investigators concluded that the clothes could have belonged to the missing Rocio Waninkoff. The missing person's sister, Rosa, recognized several rings, 2 t-shirts, and other items found in 2 garbage bags near the body as belonging to Rocio. The t-shirts were torn from stab wounds, and clothing below the waist was never found. The remains of the body were taken to the lab for forensic analysis. 6 forensic experts worked slowly and meticulously all night, using all their knowledge and skills. They had a difficult job ahead of them, because the body was badly decomposed. Decomposition is much faster in rain and heat when there is a certain amount of humidity. Not a single organ was preserved, only the bones were intact. The goal was to find something else that could help the investigation and tell us how the attack took place. As a result, numerous close wounds were found, and there were 8 stab wounds on his back, caused by a weapon with a single-sided blade. According to experts, the attack was very fast and brutal. Most likely the victim was immobilized or did not have time to react. Fingerprints were found on plastic bags that were found where the body was found. Police already had fingerprints and tire prints from the car. They also found 2 tissue samples on Rocio Waninkoff's body. At that point, there was still too little evidence that would lead to the arrest of a specific suspect. But the investigation had some evidence, data, and leads that the Civil Guard was looking into. The public pressure had an undue influence, and the investigators were just bound to find something, but they did not.
Because Rausio's body was badly decomposed, it was impossible to establish basic details, such as whether the girl had been sexually assaulted. Investigators came to one conclusion when they saw a corpse with its legs spread apart. Since the victim's legs were spread too wide, they thought it was staged. That is, the perpetrator made it look like violence. So they ruled out the motive of sexual assault and subsequent murder, and focused on a crime motivated by revenge and hatred. It was a very emotional attack, which meant that the girl could have been attacked by someone very close to her, who may have been very upset with her. With the evidence and facts gathered, the investigators conducted follow-up interviews. First of all, the investigators questioned her boyfriend, Antonio Hirata. He was the last person to see Rocio alive, and he was the one she was supposed to meet again that night. But the guy had an alibi, because he just fell asleep at home and did not go to the fair that day. All of Rocio's relatives and friends were questioned, but they all had solid alibis. A year after Rocio Waninkoff's death, the Civil Guard was able to narrow down the number of suspects, and by the end of the year they found a suspect who, in the opinion of the investigation, all the signs pointed to. That person turned out to be Dolores Vasquez. There was absolutely no evidence against Dolores, but thanks to the media, everyone began to believe this woman was guilty. Dolores Vasquez was a close friend of Alicia's. As it often happens, journalists distorted and even invented information. Allegedly, Alicia from the very first day accused Dolores in the death of her daughter. But at the time of the crime, their relationship had already ended 4 years ago. The investigation actively went after the public. The investigation focused entirely on Dolores, and now there was a motive in the case. A young girl could be a hindrance, or otherwise interfere with the romantic relationship between the two women. Everyone said that if it hadn't been for Rocio, maybe Alicia would have gone back to Dolores. It was Dolores' way of getting back at Alicia for not wanting to go back to her. That's what people said. In the eyes of the press and the public, Dolores Vasquez was guilty from the moment she was arrested. Even though the woman did not confess to anything, residents were convinced of her guilt mainly because the police believed that someone close to her was the killer. Family members claimed that Dolores was an aggressive and violent woman who was also very jealous. Alicia told reporters that Dolores was a vindictive and cruel person. The public condemned Dolores. The fact that Dolores Vasquez was non-traditional was a reason to attack her during the trial. This was not the norm in Spain. A sarcastic, aggressive, calculating, cold-blooded woman. The character was beginning to take shape. A vicious, heartless woman. A woman who bided her time for 4 years, finally coming up with a crime plan out of hatred. The audience cheered, having independently created the image of a calculating villainess for Dolores. The trial turned into an entertainment. People watched the trial only because they had nothing better to do. A huge number of people gathered outside the courthouse. People wanted to get into the courthouse to follow the trial and not miss a second. Journalists were all over the news that a close family friend had been charged with the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. Dolores Vasquez was the kind of woman no one liked. Therefore, she had virtually no chance at trial. She wasn't friendly or nice. But how many people are there in the world who are not sociable and friendly with everyone? We don't call them all criminals because they don't smile at us when we meet them, do we? In this case, the battle was fought not only in the courthouse, but also on the streets where the public was involved. All of the information, especially the rumors that the media blew up, could not help but influence the opinion of the jury. After all the TV stations, almost all the TV shows were saying that Dolores Vasquez was the one responsible for Rocio's death, as well as all the information that the reporters were distorting. So a lie told 1,000 times became the truth for Dolores. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence against Dolores Vasquez, but apparently justice just decided that someone should be in jail for it, and chose a victim who had a dubious alibi, as well as a bunch of flaws that automatically made her a scapegoat. Dolores wasn't seen at the scene. The tire tracks didn't match the car she drove. The fabric fibers found didn't match Vasquez's clothes. Nor did the fingerprints found on the trash bags at the scene. And she also had an alibi. She claimed that she was babysitting her sick mother that day while watching her little niece. But this was disregarded. More than 50 people were called to court to testify. Only once did Dolores take the stand. I didn't kill Rocio. I didn't even see her that day. All I'm asking all of Spain, is to find who did it, because it wasn't me. And whoever did it is still out there. Maybe even among you in the courtroom. There has never been any evidence against me, and there never will be, because I am innocent. Spain has a very poor judicial system that often oversteps the law. Spanish prosecutors and investigating judges are ready to step over the law and human fate to prove their theories. Absolute disregard for the law. There was no physical evidence, so the Civil Guard report described only the circumstantial evidence that pointed to Dolores Vasquez and profiled her psychologically. The jury majority found defendant Dolores Vasquez guilty of murder. She was sentenced to a 16-year prison term. The public rejoiced. Rocio's funeral was very well attended. Journalists were constantly filming despite other people's grief. At that moment, all of Rocio's relatives and all the people in the town lived in fear. This fear fueled the many television programs that covered the details of the case. After Dolores' arrest, the victim's family went from one television program to another, pulling out old stories that confirmed Vasquez's cold, unfriendly, demanding, and cruel character. It took years and another similar crime to make it clear that Rocio Vaninkoff was not at all as the public and the press had fantasized. On the morning of August 15, 2003, the parents of 17-year-old Sonia Carabantes reported their daughter's disappearance to the police. They had already called her friends, but they said that they had walked her friend to the door of her house. But Sonia wasn't home. In the street, 3 doors down from her house, right next to a tree, her parents found her shoes, purse, and phone. There were traces of blood on the cars parked nearby. Sound familiar? But if the suspect has been in jail for almost a year and a half, did the police make a mistake and have an innocently convicted person in jail? Authorities immediately began searching for and investigating the coin incident. Time passed, and despair increasingly gripped the family. There were searches in the neighborhood, but the bloodstains on Sonia's clothes left no hope for a favorable outcome. One of the main pieces of evidence in Sonia's case was a car headlight. The officers of the Civil Guard made inquiries to all the car repair shops in search of a car with a broken headlight that matched the description. There were a variety of different theories of the attack. Among them were chains of rape and other similar crimes to the disappearance of the girl in Motril. But the important fact remained that Rocio and Sonia had disappeared during the fair. All employees of the fair who worked in Motril and Coin were checked. Just as in the case of Rocio, flyers with Sonia's image were posted everywhere. So many people were involved in the search for her. They were very active in helping the police, not only by donating their time, but also by providing any assistance needed for the search. In addition to these searches, the Civil Guard also continued their investigation. The main objective was to find the girl alive, but on the 5th day after her disappearance, with the help of search dogs, Sonia's body was found near Coin. It was found in a creek under a pile of rocks. It had rained heavily the night before, washing away any trace that might have helped the police in locating the culprit. On the day of her disappearance, Sonia was at a fair in Coin. She said goodbye to friends near her home. It was there that she was attacked. The perpetrator hit her several times, which made Sonia partially unconscious, and she was unable to fight back because the attack was sudden and violent. The perpetrator then took her away in a car to a remote location away from her home. Both internal and external injuries were inflicted, and then the girl was strangled, which was the cause of death. Due to the fact that Sonia was found very quickly, it was possible to collect all the evidence and analyze the results of the forensic examination. Colonel Pacagabella reported that important evidence was indeed found on the body of Sonia Carabantes. The biological material was analyzed and then entered into the police criminal DNA database, where the much-anticipated matches were obtained with the genetic material found on the cigarette butt that was found at the crime scene in the Rocio Waninkoff case. When the 2 DNA samples were compared, they were found to be identical to each other. The man who killed Rocio in 1999 and the man who attacked Sonia turned out to be the same person. The news was incredible. Dolores Vasquez, who had been condemned without exaggeration by the whole of Spain, turned out to be innocent, while the real culprit walked free and took the life of another young girl. The puzzle is complete. An English brand cigarette butt and skin particles under the victim's fingernails, the DNA from both pieces of evidence belonged to the same person. After that, events began to unfold very quickly. On September 18th, a young woman, Cecilia Pantoja, contacted the police and said she suspected her ex-husband when she saw bloodstains on his t-shirt, just days after Sonia's body was found. She said her husband was also absent from home twice, traveling somewhere in a car on the day of the Rocio attack. Through DNA testing and the woman's testimony, police were able to identify the real killer of Rocio and Sonia. The perpetrator's name was Tony King, and he was well known in Britain as the Holloway Strangler. Tony Alexander King's crime wave began when he was still a teenager in the Holloway neighborhood of North London. In 1985, the neighborhood was the scene of a series of attacks on women in which the victims were strangled and abused. At the time, King went by his birth name, Anthony Bromwich. 5 weeks later, he was finally caught and convicted at the age of 19 for strangling 5 women to unconsciousness with a rope or cable and then abusing them. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, calling him a monster for committing the crimes because of his own inadequacy. He served only half of his sentence and was paroled in 1991, but returned to prison a few weeks later for robbing a woman and threatening her with a knife. In search of a new life, he changed his name to Tony King, married Cecilia Pantoja, and tried to live a normal family life. Their marriage produced a daughter, but King soon returned to his old habits. The police in Spain realized that they were on the right track. Tony King was put under 24-hour surveillance, and a month after Sonia's death he was arrested. Under questioning, Tony King confessed to killing 2 innocent girls. After his arrest, he said he followed Rocio as she entered a busy street on her way home from her boyfriend's house and held a razor to her neck. When she tried to free herself from her attacker, the razor stabbed into Rocio's neck. The monster panicked and stabbed her 9 times. In 2005, King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the kidnapping, violence, and murder of Sonia Carabantes. The court ordered him to pay the victim's family the equivalent of about $350,000. He also received an additional 7 years for attempted violence against a woman in Malaga in 2001. The following year, he was also found guilty of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff and received an additional 19-year sentence. Before his trial, King sent letters to Sonia and Rocio's mothers asking for forgiveness. He is currently serving his sentence at Herrera de la Mancha Maximum Security Prison in Ciudad Real in Spain. After the case was closed, a major scandal erupted in Spain over the fact that an innocent man was convicted of the murder of Rocio Waninkoff. We are accustomed to imagining that miscarriages of justice brought to light bring shame to those involved and monetary costs to the state. But this is not the case in Spain. It is difficult to accept and realize, but in the 21st century, not only police and courts can brutally punish an innocent person, but even society may well trample a man into the mud, and even if he manages to prove his case, absolutely no one will apologize. It took more than a year before it became clear that Dolores Vasquez was telling the truth when she dryly and unemotionally repeated that she was innocent. What all of Spain had taken for cruelty and insensitivity turned out to be simply the personality traits of a woman. In 2008, the Spanish Ministry of Justice offered Dolores Vasquez 120,000 euros in compensation, which was less than the 4 million euros that Dolores had originally demanded. But no one ever apologized to Dolores for the way she was treated. Dolores Vasquez, whose parents moved to Spain from Epsom, returned to the UK after she was released from prison. More than 20 years have passed, but Dolores has still not received an apology for the way she was treated, nor has she received any compensation since the case was closed. In 2014, she was working for a transport company in East London and underwent a psychological evaluation after her ordeal. She recently said she is still waiting for an apology after years of anxiety, when she found it difficult to talk to people and find work for the years of fear and humiliation she lived in. The Dolores Vasquez imprisonment case is considered one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in Spain's judicial history since 1910. Criminals easily get away with it, even if they are stupid enough to leave their DNA behind, simply because they cross the country's border. The police rushed to pin the case on at least one person without going into detail. The press hypes up scandals and digs into the dirty laundry of not only the perpetrators, but also the victims. Society easily labels and considers it normal to put someone in jail just because they dislike that person. It is a pity that such truth is true for absolutely all countries of the world.
Blind rage. Did you know that with the arrival of the holidays, the number of incidents increases? Crimes, assaults, robberies. During Christmas and New Year holidays, law enforcement officers register hundreds of crimes. What is this fact connected with? Firstly, the celebrations are accompanied by mass consumption of alcohol. People lose the measure of drinking and accordingly erase the established boundaries of behavior. Even those who have not committed atrocities before lose control. The list can also be supplemented by those who have mental deviations. When the spirit of unity, peace, and love permeates everything around, this category of society feels especially lonely and depressed. By committing criminal acts, sociopaths compensate for their moral state. In this way, they resolve accumulated internal and external conflicts. On January 25, 2022, the funeral of 26-year-old Elle Edwards was held at St. Nicholas Church in Wallasey, Merseyside, England. To see the beautiful young woman off on her final journey came several hundred people. The body of the young woman was delivered on a karate catafalque drawn by 4 white horses. Her unexpected and ridiculous death could not be accepted by the family's siblings, and the cold-blooded crime, which occurred in full view of everyone, did not leave the lips of concerned citizens for a long time. A man stopped in the parking lot near the pub Beacon, located in Wallasey. The local establishment had a special flavor and was full of visitors on Christmas Eve. For hours on end, the stranger kept his eyes on the entrance to the establishment. He felt that this was the most opportune moment for revenge. In the run-up to the festivities, the attention of many would be lessened. This meant that if he carried out his plan, he would be able to get away unnoticed. When at last the target appeared on the horizon, he fired. With a sense of satisfaction, the perpetrator started the car and fled the scene. On December 24, 2022, there was no sign of trouble. The city atmosphere was filled with magic. Everyone was preparing for the upcoming holiday. The streets were not crowded. In search of missing products, some residents were actively shopping in stores. Those who had not yet bought gifts strolled through shopping centers. However, most citizens were at home with their families. Christmas is a time of gatherings and cozy company. The Edwards family was also involved in the pre-holiday hustle and bustle. In addition, everyone was waiting for Lucy, one of the daughters of the family. To meet the upcoming holidays with her family, the girl flew in from Dubai. Her sister Ella was especially looking forward to Lucy's return. They were close in spirit and kept in touch despite the distance of thousands of miles. When the joyful moment of meeting occurred, the girls decided to cross paths with friends at the local pub, Beacon. There they had a great time. They danced and sang in karaoke, joked and laughed a lot. It was calm and peaceful as never before. However, the general merriment was broken by loud clapping. "Are those fireworks?" someone asked in the crowd. No, the atmosphere of celebration was disturbed by someone's madness. At 11:50 p.m., 12 gunshots rang out at the entrance to the pub. The bullets hit 5 people, 4 guys, and 1 girl. Ella Edwards suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Someone familiar with her attempted to give her artificial respiration, but the efforts were futile. Elle's condition was deteriorating. The injuries were too severe. After calling emergency services, ambulances arrived at the scene of the shooting. Having examined the victims, the medics made a preliminary conclusion. The 22-year-old suffered leg injuries, the 24-year-old guy was wounded in the arm, and the 33-year-old man's wrist was injured. The condition of 26-year-old Ella and the 28-year-old guy was deemed critical. On the way to the hospital, the unfortunate woman, without regaining consciousness, passed away. Ms. Edwards' injuries proved incompatible with life. Only a few hours before the crime,
Elle had been talking to her father. "I was busy with Christmas preparations when the police reported what had happened," Tim Edwards later recalled. "It came as a real shock to our family. Everyone who knew Elle found it hard to believe what had happened. After all, she was so young and beautiful for her early demise. Did she really have ill-wishers in her entourage who were capable of such a thing?" Ella Edwards was a very beautiful and cheerful girl. She worked as a beautician in a local beauty parlor and also worked part-time as a dental assistant. Despite her young age, she was established in life and had a good income. She was very goal-oriented and had no plans to rest on her laurels. Ella was not deprived of male attention. Nature awarded her with outstanding external data. Her friends noted that in addition to external beauty, her inner beauty stood out. She was very kind and positive. The character of Ms. Edwards allowed to find a common language even with the most capricious customers. For what the employee was on good account with the management. Thanks to the love of beauty and makeup, the girl was waiting for a brilliant future. However, life ordered otherwise. At the first stages of the investigation, there were no clues. The intruder attacked us suddenly as he disappeared. At the scene of the crime, he left only shell casings and victims bleeding. Detectives knew one thing for sure. The attack was planned. Police needed time to determine if Ellie was the target of the attack or was a random victim. For the most part, law enforcement officials were leaning toward the idea that the girl was among the victims by accident. Detectives interviewed the victim's family to get a better understanding of the victim's personality and the specifics of her life. All spoke positively about the girl and frankly did not understand that someone could have attacked her intentionally. From their words, the deceased had no enemies. Ella was very beautiful. Perhaps there would even be those who envied her or wanted to be close to her. However, it is unlikely that the crime occurred on the basis of envy or jealousy. The Edwards family's words reinforced the police's speculation. The fact is that recently in the city has become not uncommon cases of strife between rival criminal groups. Sometimes, as a result of their use of firearms, innocent citizens suffered. Afterwards, the victims and witnesses of the incident were interviewed. It took a long time to check cell phone service. Officers also recovered CCTV footage from the pub. The investigation was to examine them. The authorities also contacted the media. They called on people with information to help bring those responsible to justice. Above all, this involved providing video footage from mobile devices that had been taken on the night of the incident. Any of them could show the car in which the attacker arrived. City officials held a meeting with local residents. First and foremost, they wanted to support and reassure concerned citizens. The next goal the meeting had was to convince eyewitnesses to share the data they had. It was possible that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or even known the perpetrator. A group of volunteer activists was organized who went door to door and talked to citizens. The result of the work was not long in coming. It was soon established that the attacker left the pub parking lot in a dark Mercedes A-Class. CCTV cameras also showed that having pulled up to the establishment, the offender waited for some time. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. When Elle and other young people were outside, he fired shots. After that, he quickly got into a car and drove away. It was possible to establish the moment of the crime and the fact that the attacker was alone. However, it was not possible to determine where the intruder went, so detectives went door to door interviewing the residents.
Hoping to identify the attacker, they described the vehicle and the circumstances of the incident. All city streets were patrolled around the clock. On December 25th, the funeral of the murdered girl was held. Despite it being Christmas Day, the site of the victim's last funeral was closed as a sign of grief and remembrance for the victims. The owner of the Beacon pub left a message on his social media page with words of support for the family of Ellie Edwards. On the same day, her father laid flowers at the door of the establishment. "To my beautiful Elle, the light of my life, you will always be with us," he whispered. Already on December 26th, 2 suspects were detained. They were a 19-year-old Rock Ferry resident and a 30-year-old man from Tranmere. The woman was taken into custody on suspicion of conspiracy to commit a felony. 2 days later, another arrest was made against another Tranmere resident. The 31-year-old man was also suspected of conspiracy to commit a felony. At the time of his arrest, the 2 earlier arrestees remained at the station. The names of the detainees were not released due to lack of direct evidence. All 3 were soon released. The police failed to prove their involvement in the crime. The locals were angry at the rampant crime and the impotence of the police. Therefore, the detectives were forced to issue a statement again. They said that the investigation would continue until the culprit was identified and punished. It was still assumed that the shooting at the Beacon pub had been caused by a feud between local gangster clans, and the unfortunate L. Edwards was seen as a random victim. On December 30th, law enforcement reported that the 3 male victims had been released from the hospital, and the condition of the critically wounded 28-year-old had finally normalized. On January 3, 2023, police reported that about 150 pieces of data were obtained during the investigation. Among them was some very important information. It was found that the bullets fired by an unknown person could have been intended for Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld. The boys were part of a local gang. The group could not share a territory where illegal substances are traded with a rival clan. According to information obtained from closed sources, the 2 were seen scuffling on December 23rd. Apparently, the 2 did not take the fight that took place as a looming threat to their gang. Therefore, the next day the bandits went on vacation to Mayak. By their appearance there, they put the other visitors in the gunman's crosshairs. At the same time, thanks to video surveillance systems, managed to track the car on which the criminal left the scene of the crime. However, the intruder was ahead of the detectives. New Year's Eve turned out to be as turbulent as Christmas. The police station received a report of a fire near the Beacon pub. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a car matching the description of the wanted vehicle. Despite the fact that the vehicle burned out completely, the examination confirmed its identity. Apparently, the perpetrator knew that the police were on the trail, so he set the fire in order to destroy the evidence. It was also possible to establish that the car was stolen. On January 11th, the total number of people suspected in the murder of L. Edwards rose to 5. Detectives said they had made an arrest of a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman from Wirral. On January 13th, police announced the capture of the perpetrator of the shooting. He turned out to be Connor Chapman. Despite his young age, the boy was well known to police in the criminal world. He had a long record of robbery, hooliganism, threatening behavior, and aggravated carjacking. The latter offense was a real star attraction as he made headlines in many newspapers. He has been charged with several offenses in the current case. At the same time, the 23-year-old woman who was detained was released on bail. The investigation continued. It turned out that on the afternoon of December 24th, there was a scuffle between 2 rival groups. The cause was an area near a wooden church located in Beechwood. The altercation was very violent, but no compromise was reached. Somehow, Chapman became aware that several of his enemies were celebrating Christmas Eve at a local establishment. Instead of spending his first Christmas outside of prison in 4 years with his family, Connor opted for revenge. So L. Edwards really was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Chapman wasn't acting alone. Investigators managed to find out the name of another defendant in the case. It was 20-year-old Thomas Waring. The guy was taken into custody. He was charged with possession of firearms and assisting a criminal. During a search of Thomas's home was found significant evidence for the investigation. It was a videotape taken before the incident. It shows Connor picking up a gun and saying he was going to get even with someone. After the shooting, the perpetrators hid the stolen car. Later, in order to confuse the investigation, they ordered a cab under an assumed name. At around 5 a.m., the criminals returned to the place where they had hidden the Mercedes. In order not to waste time eliminating traces, they decided to get rid of the direct evidence in the case. As for Connor Chapman's identity, it was criminalized from a young age. He was born in Birkenhead, Liverpool. He was raised by his grandparents. The boy was abandoned by his parents at an early age. Since the teenager studied poorly, he dropped out of school shortly before his exams. In general, Connor has always been a problem child. Therefore, special hopes for the guy did not lay on neither teachers nor relatives. Chapman committed his first crime, shoplifting, at the age of 14. In 2016, he committed a carjacking. In 2017, another theft was joined by possession of a controlled substance. For the past 2 years, Chapman has been under police supervision and had restraining orders. However, he was more than willing to violate them. He was eventually deemed a danger to the community, so they restricted his access to several parts of the city. In 2018, he violated the ban again. Connor was in a restricted area. He also had a knife and illegal substances on him. That same year, the public heard about him for the first time. His sorry excuse for stealing a car became an anecdote among the local population. 18-year-old Connor had no intention of getting on the straight and narrow. Last time he stole an Audi. When a patrolman on the streets of the city noticed the stolen car, he ordered the driver to stop. Chapman, however, had no intention of obeying the officer's instructions. With all his might, he pressed the gas. He only provoked a chase. Along the way, the guy committed other offenses on the road. He ended up crashing into a curb. The car was thrown sideways and spun around. As a result, the carjacker was forced to leave the cabin. After not traveling a great distance, the runner was caught. The patrol caught up with Connor in the bushes. In his defense, he said he was expecting a buddy. His phrase later became a catchphrase. At trial, the defense fiercely argued for Chapman's freedom. The defense argued that the guy was under the influence of bad company, and also claimed that he was diagnosed with ADHD and a number of other mental disorders. This report was issued by a private specialist during the trial. The lawyer insisted that Connor was innocent and needed to be released. Thus, he was sentenced to 8 months in juvenile prison. Upon release, he was also brought a driving ban. This was a fairly minor punishment for a repeat offender who had 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes. The young criminal clearly had no intention of stopping and spit on all societal rules. In January 2020, Connor went on trial again. This time, he was sentenced to 10 months in prison for being caught in a public place with pockets full of illegal substances. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again for 5 episodes of the offenses. At the same time, Chapman boasted of questionable accomplishments. He proudly claimed that he spent more time in prison than he did on the outside. Eventually, by the time he was 20 years old, he had received 19 convictions for 43 felonies. 6 months before the horrific incident at the Beacon pub, Connor was tried again. The lawyer insisted that the guy had realized everything and was finally ready to reform. Chapman himself confirmed the words of the stitch-up. As mitigating circumstances, the lawyer cited the impending birth of Connor's girlfriend. Pressing on pity, he said that the first child was born when the guy was behind bars. At the time of the last trial, the police were aware that Connor was in a gang and selling illegal substances. However, oddly enough, he was only tried for burglarizing a house and stealing a couple of electric motorcycles. Perhaps there was corruption involved in the case. At least the high-priced lawyer worked off the fees he was paid. Amazingly, everyone recognized that the guy was dangerous. At one time, law enforcement officials even made a statement on television telling the public to be wary of Connor. After committing a crime, he would serve his sentence and then be released again. It's a vicious criminal cycle. However, there was no good reason for Chapman's isolation. Most likely, it was due to the fact that no one was seriously hurt by his actions. The public was extremely indignant about the gaps in the law. It appeared that nothing could be done with hardened criminals until they maimed someone or killed them. On June 13, 2023, the trial of Connor Chapman began at Liverpool Crown Court. 12 members of the Edwards family took part. Prosecutor Nigel Power announced what the defendant was charged with. Chapman pleaded not guilty to all charges. The fact that the guy was caught on CCTV footage, he tried to deny. Connor this time said that on the night of the attack, he was at home wrapping presents. He was also evasive about the stolen car. At first, he denied stealing the Mercedes. Connor claimed that the car belonged to his gang. Later, he said that he had burned it because he had learned that one of his associates had committed a crime with the car. As sufficient evidence had been collected, his lie was obvious. The trial lasted 3.5 weeks. During this time, all the circumstances of the crime were established. The real reason for the shooting on December 24th in a local pub was rage and revenge, which Chapman could not control. In fact, he didn't care who got in the way at the time of the massacre of Jake Duffy and Kieran Salkeld, members of a rival gang. Prior to that, he had acquired a Scorpion submachine gun. The weapon could fire about 15 shots in less than 1 second. Connor jumped into the stolen car and drove to the beacon. Before firing the shot, he kept surveillance for 3 hours. In the meantime, the security camera captured Elle happily socializing with friends. She even left briefly to go into another pub before taking her sister Lucy home and returning again. At 11:47 p.m., the girl showed up outside again to have a smoke. To her misfortune, she found herself next to Chapman's targets. At this time, Connor was just in the parking lot. His long brown hair was visible on camera, as well as his face covered by a hood or balaclava. A short time later, as he heeled toward his car for further escape, he fired 12 shots. The resulting wound rendered Ella unconscious and fell on top of Salkeld. Thus, Elle Edwards received bullets that were not meant for her. After the attack, Connor was going to flee to Spain, but literally at the airport was detained by law enforcement officers. To cover their tracks, Chapman and Waring set fire to the car and got rid of the weapon, which, by the way, was never found. However, traces of Connor's DNA were found on one of the shell casings, which indicates that the defendant loaded the gun before firing it. During the search of his home, red gloves were found which were clearly visible on the pub's CCTV footage. They were also found to have his DNA on them. All of these facts linked Chapman to the massacre that took place. By the way, while the perpetrator was awaiting sentencing, both of his attack targets were behind bars. Before the jury of 5 men and 7 women went to discuss the verdict, Tim Edwards was given the opportunity to speak. He said he had been forced to view CCTV footage before the trial. "It's horrible to see your daughter die and not be able to prevent it. I will never forget it. Ellie was in the street with her back turned to her perpetrator," the father reported. He added that if the shots had come 6 inches up or to the side, his Elle would still be alive. Ella's father hoped the final verdict would be fair, and the perpetrator would never again be able to spend Christmas with his family on the loose. It took the judges 3 hours to come to a unanimous decision. On July 7th, 2023, Connor Chapman was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 48 years. The Edwards family was happy that the cold-blooded criminal would be behind bars for the rest of his life. The convict cynically committed the crime and did not even think to repent of it. It was proved at the trial that the pub shooting was the culmination of a feud between the Woodchurch and Beechwood Estate gangs on both sides of the M53. Thomas Waring was also found guilty of all charges against him. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison by the court the same month. Such a short sentence was probably due to the fact that the lad, unlike Chapman, had little criminal experience. The public was outraged. Innocent citizens were once again caught up in criminal disputes. They were even angrier that potentially dangerous gang members often served minimal sentences. Prohibitions, which are used by the courts as additional penalties, have little effect. This became particularly evident in the case of Connor Chapman. The lad was subject to a ban on being on the premises where the pub was located, as well as a ban on driving. To ensure the safety of the public, they proved ineffective. The death of Elle Edwards was proof of that. The incident highlighted the need for a review of the existing legal framework. In addition, the brazen attack once again highlighted the problem of firearms availability. After several similar deaths in the county of Merseyside, the government has allocated $350,000 to implement a pilot program. It is linked to reducing gun crime across the region. Tim Edwards also announced the organization of a fund to support victims of gun violence. One of the main goals of the national authorities should be to reduce the number of guns in the hands of civilians and criminal gangs. Father L. expressed his views. He also added that carrying weapons, even for children, is becoming the norm. The younger generation is particularly vulnerable to what they see and hear. Mr. Edwards recalled that during his childhood years, he never heard of any of the kids picking up a gun, much less knowing where to get one. In his words, everyone has become very vulnerable in today's society. People are not safe anywhere. An attack can happen in a private home, on the street, or in a crowded place. A prime example of this was the party at the Beacon Pub on Christmas Eve 2022. A celebration that should have been full of joy and warmth for L. Edwards turned into an irreparable tragedy. 19-year-old student Lizzie Marriott vanished on October 9, 2012. After her classes, she went home and left a note on the table. It was addressed to Tony and Becky Hanna, the uncle and aunt of the girl where she was staying. In it, Lizzie said she was going to visit a friend and would be back no later than midnight. However, neither on that day nor the next did the niece return. Later, her car was found in the campus parking lot. The girl seemed to have disappeared without a trace. After some time, the search for the missing girl turned into a search for her body. The police became aware of the gruesome details of her death. Once the girl's openness and friendliness turned against her. This is a story about the danger posed by uncontrolled desires. Horrible crimes are committed when not only state, but also universal laws are violated. The freedom of one person ends where the rights of another begin. This is an undeniable truth. For Tony and Becky, their niece became a full-fledged family member. To save on housing, she moved in with them during her studies at the University of New Hampshire. Lizzie loved marine animals very much, so she chose a future profession in marine biology. She moved to Chester in the fall of 2012, leaving her parents Bob and Melissa Marriott, with whom she lived in Massachusetts. They were separated by a 2-hour drive, but they still maintained close communication. The girl had a gentle character, was kind and sweet, which made everyone love her. She would shout, "I'm home," her aunt recalled, and we felt joy in our hearts because she felt comfortable with us, and we with her. Lizzie liked her new life, and unprecedented horizons lay ahead. In her spare time, she worked at Target, where she quickly adapted and was well regarded. There, she met 18-year-old Kate McDonald. The girls quickly found a common language, often hanging out after work. Once Lizzie was already at Kate's apartment, so when she invited her again, she agreed. On October 9th, the friends met. They wanted to spend the evening together, have dinner, and watch a movie. However, their solitude was interrupted. 30-year-old Seth Mazzella, Kate's boyfriend, joined them. The heroine didn't mind a company. It's more fun together. Moreover, her new acquaintances were interesting personalities involved in theater, and Seth graduated from the same university as Lizzie, but in theater arts. Despite the fact that the guy worked as a consultant in an electronics store, he had a rich experience. He trained as an emergency medical technician, earned a black belt in karate, and even taught martial arts. In general, they had a lot to talk about. The evening promised to be interesting and end on a good note. It's just that, answering the young people's apartment, the girl never came out again. After Lizzie didn't return by the promised time, her relatives decided to wait until the evening of the next day. Perhaps she stayed overnight at a friend's and went from there to the university. However, when she didn't show up and on October 10th, the aunt and uncle got worried and contacted her parents. It turned out they also had no information. After the unpleasant news, the mother and father got in the car and headed to Chester. On the way, they reported their daughter's disappearance. Not only the police and relatives, but also the girl's friends joined the search. The investigation began with questioning everyone who knew her. Unfortunately, the relatives didn't know where Lizzie had gone. However, thanks to her friends, this information was established. Nate McNill, a friend, said he knew where she might be and pointed to Kate McDonald. He also said he asked Kate if she had Lizzie and she said no. Detectives took note of the guy's words and started checking the new information. Meanwhile, it was found that there were no movements in the girl's bank accounts and her phone was turned off. The initial version that she might have been in an accident was ruled out. Just a few days later, her car was found. At the same time, Bob and Melissa Marriott announced a $10,000 reward for anyone who could provide information about their daughter's whereabouts. After talking to Lizzie's friends and colleagues, investigators learned interesting information about Kate and her boyfriend. The couple was far from what they tried to appear in public. Soon after, Seth Mazzella was arrested. Lizzie and Kate's acquaintances said that recently the girls had been spending a lot of time together. However, they seemed different in character and attitude toward life. Lizzie was very sociable and compassionate, while Kate, on the contrary, was reserved and rude. What brought them closer was unclear. Those who had been working at the store for years said that this was not always the case with McDonald. After she started a relationship with Seth, she changed a lot. There was no trace of her former cheerfulness and lightness. As it turned out later, she even limited communication with her relatives, since they were against her new boyfriend. There was something suspicious about him, antisocial. The couple started dating when the girl was 17. After she turned 18, they moved in together and began living in Mazzella's apartment in Dover, New Hampshire. Paying special attention to the couple, the police checked their databases, but found nothing remarkable. Studying the profiles of young people on the internet, officers learned some details about their personal lives. Seth and Kate practiced not quite traditional relationships. On one of the websites, McDonald, under the pseudonym Miss Scarlet Vampire Actress, posted a spicy ad. She wrote that she and her lord were looking for a live-in slave. The required duties were house cleaning, dishwashing, laundry, cooking, and readiness for intimacy at any time. The girl also shared a bit about herself and her partner. She described their relationship as dominant, submissive, where the former dictates and controls, and the latter completely submits to his will. At the end, the girl attached her photos in a Gothic style. From the text, it was clear that the feelings of the two were not based on love and respect, but rather on humiliation and obedience. The couple practiced BDSM, where Seth was the dominant and Kate was the submissive. Now detectives had no doubts that they could be involved in Lizzie's disappearance. On October 12th, the young people were summoned for questioning. They were questioned simultaneously, but separately from each other. This played into the hands of the investigation. For 2 hours, Kate insisted that she hadn't met Lizzie on October 9th. After that, she refused to talk altogether. Meanwhile, Seth was more talkative. He denied his friend's words and said that on that day Marriott was indeed at their place. However, a tragedy occurred. At first, everything was fine. They watched a movie, played strip poker. After that, they engaged in a threesome. According to him, no one objected to intimacy and was morally prepared. During the process, he tied the girls with ropes, but at some point something went wrong, and Lizzie accidentally died. Then, in a state of shock and fear of being misunderstood, he and Kate took the girl's body to Pierce Island and threw it into the Piscataqua River. After that, they went home. After an 11-hour interrogation, Mazzella went with the police to the designated place, where he vividly demonstrated how he got there and threw the body off the cliff. On October 13th, the guy was charged with murder. The news of their daughter's death was devastating for her parents. Melissa Marriott said she had a feeling about it, but she didn't want to believe it until the last moment. On the same day, a candlelight vigil was held in memory of the departed. Her father thanked those who came and said that the prayers spoken today would help Lizzie find peace. "She has become an angel who flew to heaven," said Bob Marriott. Her friend Nate, who actively participated in the search for the girl, remembered that she always told funny stories, so she could lift spirits or comfort in difficult times. Perhaps she would have found something to say to us in this case too, he sadly said. The girl's parents refused to accept the version of death told by Mazzella. They explained that their daughter was in a relationship and cherished it very much. According to them, she would never betray her beloved Brittany. They prayed to God and asked the police to find the poor girl's body as soon as possible, to say goodbye to her like humans, and bury her. The search went on every day. Volunteers joined the efforts of the authorities. Even a private detective was working on it. However, the river, which became Lizzie's final resting place, is subject to strong tides and ebbs. It is quite possible that she has long been carried into the Atlantic Ocean. The investigation continued. A search took place in Mazzella's apartment and beyond. It is worth noting that the young couple's house was not clean and orderly. Chaos reigned everywhere. Detectives also found out that Seth was interested in occultism and black magic. Since no evidence was found in the apartment, forensic experts examined the surrounding area. In one of the trash containers, they found a bag of belongings. Among them were black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear. During the examination, it was established that the underwear had DNA traces belonging to Seth and Lizzie. This confirmed the intimate nature of their relationship, and the sweatshirt belonged to the deceased and was identified by her family. But what were leather gloves doing on this list? If it's a love game accessory, why get rid of it, like the rest of the evidence? Apparently, not everything in Mazzella's words was true. He could easily pass off the desired as reality. However, what Kat MacDonald said confirmed it. The girl broke her silence, and on October 17th, she told what happened. She admitted that on October 9th, Lizzie came to her. Later, Seth joined them. At first, the three of them watched a movie, then played strip poker. In the process of the game, they got excited and decided to have intimate relationship. According to her, everyone's desire was mutual. It all started with kisses and tenderness. Then Seth suggested tying Lizzie up with ropes, and she agreed. The girl even showed schematically how Seth did it. Everything was going well, but suddenly, Marriott had a seizure. She began to suffocate, and moments later, she lost consciousness. When Seth and Kat lifted the girl, she wasn't breathing. Everything happened quickly and unexpectedly. MacDonald claimed that no one was to blame for what happened. It was an accident. However, a significant role in the investigation was played by the testimony of an unexpected witness. One day, a young woman went to the police station. She said she had important information about Lizzie Marriott's case and asked to speak to the detectives leading the investigation. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mazzella's ex-girlfriend. From the conversation, it became clear what she was hinting at. Seth was capable of murder. Once he confessed to her that in one of his fantasies, he takes someone's life. But let's start from the beginning. Catherine and Seth met about 10 years ago. At first, he seemed attentive and caring. He courted her beautifully, didn't skimp on flowers and gifts. He was very charming in conversation. The girl quickly fell in love with the affable young man, but at the moment of their first intimacy, she learned that he was into BDSM. At first, she didn't mind new sensations, as long as he kept himself under control. However, later, Seth began to show excessive cruelty and dominance. He didn't want to be contradicted or stopped. Sometimes he shared his thoughts and fantasies with her. During one such conversation, Catherine heard a terrible confession. Then she realized he could be dangerous. As if to confirm this, he grabbed her by the throat very tightly once. The girl begged him to let go, but he wouldn't stop and continued to squeeze harder. This incident finally shattered her illusions. Since they moved to another city, the girl didn't know where to go to get away from him. She didn't know anyone and didn't communicate with anyone. Besides, she was financially dependent on her boyfriend, so she continued to live with him, waiting for a convenient moment to escape. Catherine admitted that over time, Seth started talking about a third partner. He got bored with her in bed, so he decided to spice things up. Therefore, he periodically brought different girls to their house, but none of them stayed long. So Mazzella said they needed to find a permanent girlfriend. Catherine's life turned into hell. Catherine admitted that Seth had frightened her so much that she didn't dare to escape. After a few months, gathering courage, she finally decided to run away. Fish miraculously overcame the distance of 1,000 miles to get to her parents' house. But that's another story. She never saw her ex-boyfriend again. In May 2014, Seth Mazzella appeared in court. The prosecution believed that the defendant was guilty not only of intentional murder, but also of taking advantage. Several people testified against him. Shortly before the trial, among them was Kat McDonald. 2 months after Lizzie's death, she too was arrested and was in custody. She was charged with obstruction of justice and investigation. The girl had plenty of time to analyze what had happened and understand whom she was covering for. Initially, while behind bars, she and Seth were actively corresponding. The lovers dreamed of escaping and going to another country where there were no extradition laws. They wanted to get married and have children. However, their escape plans suffered a setback. In the winter of 2012, Seth persuaded his cellmate Ryan Bachman, who was soon to be released. Mazzella gave him access to his bank account. Bachman was supposed to withdraw money, buy drugs with it, and sell them, thereby increasing the initial capital. With this amount, they planned to buy weapons, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. However, the friend decided to use the money for his own purposes. Moreover, authorities learned about the plan. After that, Seth abandoned the escape plan and sent Kat a letter suggesting they meet in the afterlife. He sincerely believed that death was not the end of life. Perhaps, in this way, he hinted to the girl about ending her life. In any case, time helped McDonald. Her thoughts cleared up. Therefore, when in 2014 the prosecutor's office offered her a favorable deal, she agreed without hesitation. According to it, the suspect had to tell the truth about what happened in the apartment on the evening of October 9th. In return, the threatened 20-year prison sentence was reduced to 3, a fairly advantageous offer, considering the circumstances that became known to the investigation afterward. The girl admitted that she was very afraid of Seth and obeyed him in everything. He gradually suppressed her will, deprived her of independence. A month and a half before the tragedy, the guy sent her a message ordering her to find a third partner as soon as possible, because he didn't want to be alone while Kat was away. The thing is, the girl had 10-day theater tours scheduled. However, McDonald never found a replacement for herself. Over time, the tone of Mazzella's messages changed. From orders, he moved on to threats, and promised a terrible retribution if she didn't do what he wanted. At the very least, Kat had to bring one of her friends with whom he could carry out his plan. To fulfill the order, Kat invited Lizzie over. She agreed easily because she had been a guest at her place once and trusted her. And to ensure that the girl came without hesitation, McDonald kept silent about the fact that they wouldn't be alone. Seth liked the presumed partner. He had seen her photos before, so he eagerly awaited the appointed hour. Imagine the disappointment and anger the guy felt when the evening didn't go as planned. On October 9th at 9 p.m., Marriott arrived at Mazzella's apartment. At first, Kat and Lizzie spent time together, chatting. Then Seth joined them. He was cheerful, joked a lot, and took care of the girls. In general, he brightened up the evening. After that, the young people started watching the movie. During the viewing, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights in the room. He wanted to create a conducive atmosphere for intimacy. The game was casual, but Lizzie was losing, so she ended up in her underwear. In another losing hand, Seth suggested kissing Kat, but the girl refused, explaining that she was already in a relationship and it repulsed her. After a while, the heated guy suggested Marriott to be alone, to which she categorically replied no. In response to her reaction, Seth went to his room, where he put on black leather gloves and took out a rope. After that, he returned and sat behind Lizzie. When Seth slipped the weapon over her neck, The unsuspecting girl didn't even have time to scream. He strangled the girl without blinking an eye. Then the murderer carried out his plan and violated the body of the deceased. All this time, his girlfriend sat nearby and silently watched. Kat explained that she was very scared. She was afraid of becoming the next victim, so she did nothing to help the poor girl. Around 1 a.m, the couple wrapped Lizzie's body in tarpaulin and put it in a suitcase, which they carried to Lizzie's car. Then they headed to Pierce Island by the river there, where they lifted the suitcase onto an observation deck, pulled out the dead Marriott, and threw her off the cliff. Then they cleaned up in the car together, drove to campus, and left the girl's car in the parking lot. The couple walked 10 miles home. Kat explained that she was scared by what was happening and was in a state of shock. And later, she didn't want to testify against the guy because she knew he wouldn't have any trouble getting rid of her. During the trial, the girl kept sobbing constantly, but not a single tear fell from her eyes. Because of this, many in the courtroom doubted her sincerity. She was a good actress and could easily pretend to be miserable. This caught the attention of Seth's lawyer. He claimed that the girl could professionally transform into any role. The defendant's defense insisted that Lizzie died accidentally during intimacy. At the same time, no one denied that Seth and Kat got rid of her by disposing of the body. McDonald's defense, on the other hand, argued that Kat had been under pressure for a long time, which had shaken the girl's mental state. McDye essentially limited her communication with family and friends, constantly controlling and coercing her into intimacy. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, emphasizing the discovered gloves. According to the prosecutor, Mazzella knew what he was going to do with Lizzie, so he deliberately put them on. He did it to protect himself and hide the traces. Considering all the circumstances, his action was by no means accidental. Witnesses for the prosecution also included Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of the couple. It turns out that at 10:49 p.m. after Marriott's murder, Seth called them. He said he needed help and asked them to come over. After 11 p.m., they appeared at Mazzella's apartment and saw a strange scene. Seth was sitting on the bed, and a girl in lingerie lay next to him. When Paul asked what was going on, Seth replied, "This time things went too far." He repeated this phrase over and over again. Roberta found Kat on the kitchen floor. The girl was sitting in the fetal position and rocking back and forth. The arriving couple immediately said to call an ambulance and quickly left. They didn't interfere and didn't call the police because they didn't want any extra trouble. On August 14, 2014, Seth Mazzella was found guilty of first-degree murder by strangulation, taking advantage, and criminal conspiracy. The 32-year-old man was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. 20-year-old Kat McDonald received the promised 3 years of imprisonment. It is known that in 2016, the girl was released. She does not maintain any social networks, at least not under her own name. Some believe she returned to her parents. Lizzie Marriott's body was never found. The girl's parents couldn't bury their daughter, so they made a small memorial for her in the form of a bench by the lake in their hometown. Bob and Melissa Marriott believe that the sentence is too lenient for Lizzie's former friend. Although the perpetrator is punished, they cannot call it justice. The girl is dead and will never return. However, her case can serve as an example for other women.